This is Hans. He was summoned into the body of an NPC and became stronger than every hero out there. His village was attacked by a horde of monsters. The hero was killed and Hans' best friend lost his arm. He grabbed the hero's sword and discovered he could absorb the power of fallen heroes. With that power, he was able to defeat the monster. So Hans comes up with a plan to team up with other heroes, acting like he's just watching while they do the fighting. When the hero falls, he picks up the weapon and steals all their abilities, becoming stronger and stronger. On his journey, he buys a slave to use as bait. She lures the monsters in, and Hans takes them all out with a surprise attack. Hans wants to be a hero, but it's way easier for him to become a villain. But in the middle of all that darkness, he defended his kingdom from the invasion of the Dark Empire. Challenging the big boss Sultan Radak to a duel, Hans obliterated the Black Knight like he was nothing with a godlike power. He got so strong that the most powerful hero in the kingdom started training under him just to reach the same level. But to understand how an NPC became number one, let's go back to the beginning of the story. The protagonist wakes up dizzy with his eyes bleeding. He looks ahead and sees soldiers fighting a werewolf and has no idea what he's looking at. The soldiers are killed, and he's left alone facing the werewolf. Cornered, he grabs an axe to defend himself. But the werewolf comes at him, lands a hit right in the stomach that knocks him to the ground, leaving him completely unable to move. The werewolf stares him down, ready to kill. Just as it was about to finish him off, his childhood friend shows up and attacks the monster, but it dodges. Since the protagonist is inside an NPC's body, he stays out of the fight to avoid making things worse. The werewolf goes after the friend, but the boy grabs a spear, throws it at the monster, and hits it dead center in the chest. Then he draws his sword and kills the werewolf. But that wasn't the only one. There are more werewolves in the area. Hans, the protagonist, decides to run into a barn. And here our genius makes a decision that separates the men from the boys to hide his human scent. He covers himself in horse manure. That's right. The guy rolls in horse crap just to survive. He was hiding when he starts hearing screams from the village. When he went to check, the great hero Caddis had arrived to save everyone. Hans gets excited thinking everything is going to be fine. The hero faces the werewolf and charges at full speed. But the world is cruel. The hero takes a hit from the werewolf and dies instantly. Hans goes into shock and asks himself, if the hero is dead, who's going to save everyone now? All that's left is Hans covered in crap. Hans realizes that if he does nothing, he's dead. He runs to the hero's body, grabs the sword, and suddenly all of Caddis' training memories flood into his mind. He didn't gain strength, but he gained technique. He climbs onto a structure and spots the big monster below. When the snow werewolf passes underneath him, he leaps from above and lands, driving the sword into the back of the monster's neck. The beast tries to shake Hans off, but he won't let go to make sure the monster can't focus on fighting back. Hans uses his secret weapon. He rubs his shit-stained hand all over the werewolf's snout. The monster loses consciousness, and Hans moves in to finish it off. But the beast moves so fast it sends Hans flying across the village just as the werewolf is closing in to kill Hans. Look who shows up. The redhead friend, hero of the moment, who already saved him once and is now saving him again. But when the redhead drives his sword into the werewolf, he takes a punch so powerful it rips his arm clean off and he dies with no one left to save him. Hans takes a deep breath and goes straight at the monster. He unleashes an absurd power that tears the sky apart with a single attack. He does what no hero could. Hans kills the beast and laughs in the middle of the chaos, because he just discovered he can steal the experience from those who die sometime later. Now knowing he's a talent vampire, he needs to find a new hero to steal their powers from. His next target will be Pavel's Cordovan, an elite archer. He puts on his armor and steps out of his room. Who does he run into? The next target himself. Hans buys him lunch, so they become friends and go hunting together. They head into a forest to hunt a boss called Etro, the demonic tree. When they find the monster, Pavel starts fighting this talking trunk. He jumps, shoots, uses a magic stone that causes a huge explosion. Meanwhile, our protagonist is just eating popcorn waiting for his moment. Pavel's is tearing through the boss with ease, but right before the final blow, Pavel's crossbow jams and he gets crushed like a bug. Hans stands up thinking, I'm so devastated hearing news like this. He runs over, grabs the dead guy's bag of explosives and absorbs Pavel's aiming ability. Now he's a swordsman with sniper precision. He scales the tree dodging branches, jumps, pries open the monster's mouth with his sword, tosses the bag of bombs inside, and with the precision stolen from the dead archer throws a dagger to detonate everything during the explosion. Hans falls while farming aura, thinking he's Deadpool, while the tree turns into barbecue. With the boss dead and the loot secured, Hans realizes he needs someone stronger than these glass cannon heroes, which takes him to the village of Calyx, where there's a gray kitty stretching. To get to the kitty, the protagonist has to go through a wooden gate and a humble clothesline. But the kitty isn't the goal, it's what's further ahead, if his memory's right. So the guy stops in front of some generic big dude and tells him it's the announcement of wisdom, which seems to be some kind of code to access the door behind him. The man flashes a huge grin that shows a gold tooth, then the protagonist goes in and starts heading down the stairs into the darkness. Down there, he'll be able to find a certain kind of tool when he reaches the basement. The place is kind of creepy and cave-like. There are even some drips. That place is called the Owl Nest Underground Brokerage, basically a big black market, just shady people walking around. And Hans keeps walking deeper into the place. Further ahead, there's a doorway with a curtain made of torn cloth above it, a cheap-looking logo. And on the sides, a sad girl leaning against the wall. A woman who looks like a vendor notices the warrior coming up, and then goes after him, offering to show him around. Gotta earn that commission, right? But the guy says he doesn't need it, he already knows the place. The vendor is stunned, wondering what kind of sicko doesn't work there but is familiar with a place like that. Vanna Black Ring is a game known for its difficulty. That's a place newbies go to make things easier, and the protagonist used to be one of them. So he strolls right past the cages with chained up people on display. Nope. Not you either. Until he stops in front of a young albino girl staring at the floor, and turns to the girl like she's a Pokemon and says, "I choose you." The girl doesn't even react, right? In her situation, there's more room for things to get better, but a bigger chance they'll get worse. By late afternoon the next day, it was already time to leave the city. At the north exit of the city, one of the guards is yawning, sleepy as hell. The other is judging the weirdo leaving with a kid all beat up, but something's bothering the protagonist, the slave he bought the day before. She seems more messed up than he thought. The poor girl, quiet, not understanding anything. Well, whatever, in the end she's just a temporary tool. Nothing more and nothing less than that. My God, what a heartless man. He stayed there a bit with the girl, leaning against the wall, waiting for a specific wagon to leave. The top part of the red crocodile tooth. And that guy over there, a lunatic built like a bear with a huge sword. His name is Gerbier. Speaking of that, he's holding the vermilion sword. For some reason he's using a big sword instead of a medium one. Looks like the psycho leveled up just by looking, you can tell. He and each of the adventurers are growing and developing, and since our boy knows all their routes by heart, it's easy to know where they're going. So he calls Lemlan his newest acquisition. The girl answers with just a few words. You can't tell if she's weird or traumatized. The protagonist tells the girl that from there on, they're gonna move fast and she needs to stay close to him and keep up. Lemlan just nods. A simple request after all. He expects nothing from the shorty. Then both of them follow the rocky path as the sun sets. The slave's job is to pull monster aggro when there's trouble. Put simply, a little piece of bait. Lemlan gets scared of the crows and runs closer to the protagonist, who's thinking it'd be best not to have to use the girl at night. In this land where the moon is always full, they reach some ruins with piles of skulls at the entrance. And again the guy calls for the girl and she jumps. Poor thing. Then he tells her to come to him real quick. She thinks it's suspicious and hesitates. But she knows she has no choice and starts walking toward the masked guy. When she gets close enough, he throws a pink powder in her face and by reflex, she starts shaking all over, and then she calls for master like she's begging. Then she realizes nothing bad happened and asks what this aura coming off her is. The protagonist explains he made that powder by crushing a little fruit and the point was to temporarily mask their smell. Lemlan feels relieved when she realizes that, at least for now, she wasn't going to become a statistic. It's a temporary solution, but at least they'd avoid a bunch of monsters. The best way to survive is not to fight at all. Plus, he's still traumatized by the Wolfrican from the beginning. The moon stays beautiful and bright in a starless sky. Meanwhile, the duo made up of a master and a slave goes deeper into some super sketchy ruins. The guy stops, puts his hand on his chin and thinks for a bit, while the girl is scared to death. At minimum, that place was haunted. Before going in, it was already obvious he didn't plan to help Gerbier. But when he gets there at the foot of the stairs, he's even more sure. The protagonist reaches the top and Lemlan comes up right behind. By now the young guy has understood there's no point trusting anyone there, only what he already knows from having played the game. Because he's already seen 2 of the game's heroes get taken out just like that. So it's better to keep the possibilities open. That said, he and the pet girl safely watch the adventurers all fighting an army of little skeletons down below. Time goes by, and the group keeps pushing through the twisted rocks of the tourist spot. Meanwhile, some skulls gather around something, like a free sample line. And a much bigger creature comes closer, carrying an apple so heavy it leaves a trail on the ground. Anyway, we can see the free sample is actually the hero Gerbier, and the skeletons stop messing with him when the boss shows up, which in this case is Hamel himself, the martyr hungry for darkness. A giant jack skull with a wig and armor. Still watching from far away, the protagonist thinks out loud that even Gerbier is useless. Lemlan has no idea what's going on in that man's head. Whether the heroes got nerfed or got dumb because nobody's playing them, who knows. But it's clear Hans is gonna have to handle the mess himself. The guy starts getting up while telling the girl to get ready. Then he asks if she remembers what he taught her earlier. And Lemlan puts on a pitiful face and asks if she really has to do this. But the protagonist doesn't care at all and asks her if it looks like he's joking or something. The girl trembles all over and answers, no, the master doesn't look like he's playing around. So the guy tells her that if she wants to live, she just shouldn't think and keep running. Then he grabs something at his waist to pay her for the task. And he tosses 5 little gold coins into the girl's hand so she can go risk her life. But Lemlan isn't even worried about that anymore. All she can think is that with each one of those coins you could buy like 400 little bread rolls. The protagonist sees her staring at the coins and asks if it's not enough and maybe she wants more. But the girl is thinking that that was already a lot. Then the heartless guy keeps explaining and shows a branch that, when burned, gives off a smell that attracts monsters, and she needs to take it and go to where he told her. Then he takes a little stone and lights the branch and hands it to the girl, warning her she doesn't need to come back once she's out of that place. She can just go live her life, but she mentions she still has a contract to fulfill. Then the protagonist says he forgot to tell her, but he already finished her slavery contract before they even got there. The girl takes the burning branch, still shocked by the reveal she wasn't a slave anymore. Then he tells her that if she doesn't believe it, she can check once she gets out of there, then calls her name one last time and tells the poor girl to run because the thing's been burning for a while already, and she obeys, still shaken by all of it. Lemlan jumps down a drop of about 5 meters, but lands nimbly. Then she starts waving the burning stick around in the air. She even yells for the beasts to come to her full service. That, even the necromancer skull, that gym rat-looking one, is interested. Then, he stretches out his little hand, ordering the skeletons to bring that snack to him. And the skulls take off running. One of them is still holding Gerbier's left arm up like a trophy. The girl runs even harder if she knows any prayer. Now's the time the enemy army follows Lemlan, just like planned from his corner. The protagonist reveals that the girl who looked albino is actually from the white elf race. So she won't get caught by those skeletons. It's time for our boy to get into action. And he starts by chucking the stone he used to light the stick right at the mid-boss head. The thing just feels the hit and is like, what the hell was that? Turns out that was a damn cursed stone, so it explodes a moment after hitting the Skullig Zoo. Alright, now there are only 3 little soldiers left, so the guy takes the chance to grab a shield that's lying there on the ground. He was expecting like 5, so this should be even easier. The protagonist gets into a fighting stance. In front of him 3 skeletons not happy at all with his antics. Meanwhile, our little elf girl is still running for her life. Luckily, the shorty's got quick feet, and she keeps pushing forward even with some evil skulls threatening her along the way. She clearly remembers her old master's instructions, runs straight through the northern passage without thinking about anything else. Once she's out of that place, the skeletons won't be able to follow her anymore, so Lemlan tears through those corridors like lightning. There isn't even time for the beast to react. And finally, she spots the exit gate. As soon as the elf gets through, the enemies just stand there like idiots in front of the gate. At last, she stops and starts catching her breath. The plan worked. Then she looks back and sees that just like the master said, the skeletons aren't on her tail anymore. So she starts thinking about what that means. Those who are marked with the red arrow are bound to a slavery contract, so they get used and then tossed aside. The girl grips her shirt near where her mark is, then she starts trembling since she's a slave. Her job was just to be bait. The adrenaline fades, Lemlan's legs give out, and she collapses on the ground. This time she really thought she was done for. She starts crying, everything the master said was true, and now Lemlan was a free being. Cut back to the center of the ruins, and there's a skeleton soldier attacking the protagonist. The guy blocks with the little shield he picked up off the ground. Then he runs the skull through between the ribs with his sword. The other two are coming in, and the ideal thing for ranged attacks would be to have a dagger. But with this level of throwing proficiency, the weapon doesn't really matter, so the young guy throws the sword anyway. It hits the head of the closest skeleton, which is now going to be looking up for the rest of its life or unlife. It wasn't enough to push the soldier back, but that's fine. All he needed was for it to stop for just a moment, so he could touch Gerbier's sword. The hero's furious aura lights up in the protagonist's golden glow, and now he's using that massive sword, thinking about how that weapon was pure romance. Hans decides to test his new little toy on the remaining enemies. Starting with the skull that only looks up, man, he knocks the thing loose with a single smack. The top part straight up goes flying, and best of all, the protagonist feels light like he's using a tiny knife. While he stops to wonder if he also absorbed Gerbier's physical abilities, the last soldier is coming at him with a little spear. And the guy dodges the toothpick while he starts spinning his body, sending the last soldier to the same place as the other two. Now that he's dealt with those little skeletons, there's only one enemy left. Hamel, the mid-tier boss who just woke up after passing out from fear. The moon keeps serving as a giant streetlight. Hamel attacks the protagonist with his concrete tip. The guy dodges, and the weapon makes a hole in the ground. Even though he got rid of the little soldiers, the strength and healing power of the wig-wearing skull were a pain in the ass. Even if he could beat Hamel with the absorbed powers, it's really hard to get close while he's swinging that huge thing around. First he needs to be stopped. While the protagonist was thinking about life, the jack skeleton was coming in pissed with another attack. This time there's no time to dodge, so let's hope this big-ass sword can take it. The dark creature's club slams into the sword like a wrecking ball and cracks the blade in half. There's still enough force left to hit the shield behind it and send the protagonist flying. Our boy face plants hard and goes sliding across the ground. He tries to use the sword to get up before Hamel gets close enough, but his body is wrecked. Then the thing comes charging in, ready to turn the guy into a legend. At the last second, Hans still manages to absorb the impact with the shield. Even so, he goes flying like a baseball and breaks the wall with his back. Now besides being messed up and down, the protagonist also has part of the wall fallen on top of him. But that shield must be SSS tier, huh? It didn't even get a scratch. The guy's body doesn't respond like it should anymore. He spits red. He must have broken all his ribs. If he takes even one more hit from the boss, he's gonna die again. Gerbier's sword technique wasn't good enough. Right then our boy realizes he's doing everything wrong. He throws the helmet on the ground, not believing he was really depending on those skills. His weapon broke and he's basically done for. Whatever, that doesn't matter now. From here on out, the protagonist is gonna attack Hamel with what head already prepared. He puts his hand into his side pouch. Luckily, the thing didn't come closer. It must have assumed the kid was done for. At least Hans' body is pretty tough because our guy is already able to run again, and he's charging at the big skull and the thing's there, ready to yeet this kid out of the atmosphere. Hamel's attacks are fatal. One single hit will be enough to kill the guy, but attacks like that have a weak point. Before he reaches the wig-wearing skull, the protagonist throws another damn rock. And he follows right behind the thrown item. The rock lands between Hamel's feet, making the enemy stumble backward. And there's no way the skeleton can attack with something that big if he can't keep his balance. Hamel finally leaves an opening and the protagonist pulls a potion from the bag. Then he throws it at the monster's elbow while it's still recovering. The liquid in the vial was extremely corrosive and started melting the skeleton's arm. As a result, the creature's weapon falls to the ground. And Hamel goes crazy with rage, staring at his stump. Then the protagonist asks the master of that place what he thought had prepared that little chain right there, especially for this occasion. A weapon extremely effective against the 4 skeleton kings. Hans throws the end of the chain at the monster and it starts wrapping around him. Hamel's core is in his head. After chaining up the creature, the protagonist sets up a downward strike because if he can destroy the core, the win is his. Next, the guy jumps onto the big beast's shoulders like he's about to start a cockfight, using the chain to control it. Then he pulls another corrosive potion out of his bag and smashes the vial on the monster's head, making its skull start to melt. For a brief moment you can see the core inside its head. But Hamel's insane regeneration is even stronger near the core and the hole starts closing right after. It's annoying, but still within what he expected. Luckily, our boy is loaded. So he bought enough of the potion, which is actually holy water. The protagonist presses the bottle's neck against the skull before the hole closes completely and gives the skullface's core a nice blessing. He was an atheist and he really didn't like that. The boss tries to rip Han's shield away but doesn't even have the strength for that, so yeah, the holy attack was definitely working. Resisting was pointless while Hamel's weak spot was melting. The young man held the scythe at the end of the chain tight, keeping the beast in place. When the monster got too weak to resist, Hans pulled out one last holy water to finish off that hole. Perish this time using the eye socket hole, blasting the top of the skeleton to dust. After the beast was taken out, the young man spent some time leaning against the fountain, watching the enemy lying motionless on the ground. The protagonist starts remembering that they fought just like the last time he beat the boss in the game. Even so, our guy is really frustrated. He just wanted to help the heroes finish the story easily and then live a comfortable life, which he's not sure is even going to be possible anymore. His thoughts are interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Lemlan came back even though she was scared, and on the way she picked up the helmet that was lying on the ground to give back to the guy. So our hero continues his journey through the surreal world of Vantablack Ring. But it feels like the next city never comes, and he still had to be completely wrecked after every battle he fought. Like all that wasn't enough, now there's an elf kid following him around, and Hans asks the girl if she's not going to take the helmet off. The elf takes the helmet off, and underneath she had this totally blank dopey face. Then Lemlan hugs the gear and walks along happily with it, while the protagonist lets out a long sigh of disgust after the battle against the martyr Hamel. The girl came back on her own, and our boy was confused. He already told the idiot she's free, but he's really hurt and stops to cough in the middle of the lecture. The guy's armor is broken, and he's clearly in terrible shape. That made Lemlan worried he needed treatment, so the little elf grabbed whatever she could from the young man's stuff to patch him up, and wrapped up all the wounds on his chest. Then the protagonist put his shirt back on. He thanked the girl and told her to go on her way, but she shook her head side to side. Nope. At first the guy's confused, but then he gets an idea, and offers the girl a bag full of gold. She's speechless, but even so, Lemlan doesn't need more money either, so he asks if she needs anything, and she stares at him where that man's resource is infinite or what. Then again the girl shakes her head. No. Hans looks closely at the little elf, and thinks what the hell that damn girl wants him to do when she won't say what she wants. Coming out of the flashback, the protagonist has already gotten the helmet back. He looks behind him again, and she's still there. So he starts running like a maniac. If he can lose her, Lemlan will never be able to find him again. But she's there exactly because she's a white elf way faster than him. The young man is visibly frustrated with the situation, but the girl doesn't seem shaken. She just keeps going calmly, and he wouldn't be able to run away at night either, because the girl held onto his cloak while she slept. Lemlan already seemed comfortable around the protagonist. At dawn, the birds start up their routine, and our duo finally found a sign pointing to civilization ahead. The sign pointed to the nearest place, Alban Fort. Ideally, the next stop was Malik Castle. But in those circumstances they needed to take a break in Alban, but bringing that crazy girl in there could cause trouble. Honestly, to the protagonist, Lemlan was nothing but extra baggage. So Hans confronts the girl again. He definitely freed her, so why the hell was she still following him? The little elf, who had managed to get the helmet back, decided to answer this time. She wants to keep following her master. So the main guy tries to understand why, and asks what the reason is, since he didn't do anything to her. And she explains that that's exactly the reason. He didn't hit her or do anything bad to her. So the girl gets embarrassed to keep going, and the guy pushes her. So what is it? Anyway, Lemlan looks him in the eyes and admits she doesn't want to die for a moment. They just stare at each other in silence. The protagonist asks her if she really thinks she'll be safer with him, and tells her to look at the state he's in, all beat up, having to hold himself together so he doesn't fall apart. Then she explains that even so, the moment she ends up alone, she's gonna pass out real quick. Hans argues that that's why he gave her enough money to survive. The girl admits she appreciated the gesture, but it wouldn't take long for someone to rob her. The guy loses his patience and asks if she's an idiot or something. But looking at the girl there, devastated and almost crying, he could understand what she was doing. He just didn't want anything to do with it. It was already hard enough to survive. Now he had to take care of a kid who unilaterally decided she's not leaving him, and that he really is her best option. To make it worse, Lemlan wasn't human. She was an elf from the White Flowers tribe, and with her kind of bad luck, she'd end up getting captured and caged again. Her race is rare and in high demand for a bunch of reasons. On the last mission, she managed to distract an army of monsters all by herself. But now, far from that crisis, our boy isn't expecting anything from her anymore. Again, the guy sighs like his soul is leaving his body. The girl even starts to worry. In the end, Lemlan wins by sheer stubbornness, and the protagonist tells her to take care of her helmet, and if she lost it, he'd abandon her. Our little elf gets all emotional about finally having someone, and she accepts the conditions with a smile on her face. Now that helmet would basically be part of her. Then the pair moves on until they reach the Alban fortress. If the protagonist remembered right, there'd be an event going on there. Cut to the county of Pistania, which is inside the Alban fortress. Even late at night, the area is still pretty busy, and the potion shop is still open. A customer shows up asking when his order is going to be ready, and he walks up to the owner's desk, asking if she isn't taking too long. But the woman is already tired of telling the guy that to finish it, she needs an item called Ashes of the Fainted One, and she's also already said she's only one who can fix that arm, so the guy should smile a little because he's wasting that face. The guy gets mad and asks why she talks so much. Well, look at that, our buddy Flop is alive and threatening little shop owners, but soon the guy leaves the shop, still frustrated. The woman, who probably hasn't slept in a few months, is thinking about the contrast between the redhead's face and his personality. Then the doors open again, and she even thinks it's weird to get another customer at that hour. And in walks a guy with as much under-eye baggage as her, wanting a restoration elixir, and with him, an elven child. The shopkeeper says yes, but she's curious, she's never seen that young man around. So the protagonist says he got to the area today. The woman gets excited and asks where he's from and how he knows she sells elixir. Out of nowhere, it turned into an interrogation. Hans would probably rather take a punch to the face. The woman even asks what he thinks about her. The protagonist loses his patience and asks if any of those answers really mattered. To our surprise, the woman answers that it doesn't matter to her. Then she goes back to work while our boy waits, and the little elf looks around the shop's products with curiosity. Lemlan just stands there, fixated, staring at some random skull. And the girl is checking her stock. So she asks our guy how many potions he's gonna need. Without even thinking much about it, Hans says he wants 10. Then it's on the shopkeeper to warn him her stuff is kinda expensive. The protagonist says that's fine and he's willing to pay. He knows what her work is worth and he's willing to offer a fair price. The sly one already cracks a little smile. Looks like her new customer is rich, so she says she'll need at least 10 gold coins, but our guy decides to show who's boss and says he'll pay 15, catching the shopkeeper off guard. So she asks if she heard him right, so Hans repeats it. He'll pay 15 gold coins for the 10 elixirs. That's a fair price for her work. It might look like our boy's just throwing money away, but he needs to make sure the woman understands how much he appreciates her, so he starts putting the little coins on the table. The apothecary in front of him shares some important info, as long as he can raise the affinity between them. In the end, he remembers an item the woman needs, and that he conveniently picked up on the last mission. So he asks the little elf girl to grab the thing from the bag. Lemlan puts a sack full of ashes from the fallen on the table. When the merchant looks at what's inside the bag, she has no doubts. It was exactly what she was looking for. The woman touches her chin, which the protagonist knows is a sign her favorability went up. Would it be too much to think things are moving faster than expected? Then, the apothecary asks if he's interested in items like the rings she's wearing. With all that material you could make 3. But if he wanted a bigger amount, he'd just have to pay an extra fee, but the guy says he's good, and starts chugging the potion. It didn't take long for Hans to feel something incredible happening. A green aura covers his whole body. But man, what a horrible taste. If he could, he'd never drink that again. Still, the stuff really works. Now the protagonist felt good as new. Out of nowhere, the apothecary changes the subject and asks if that girl next to him was a slave. Hans asks the woman if she wanted the girl. The poor girl immediately looks all down, and the woman, who apparently has a heart, says she unfortunately won't take her because it looks like the girl is pretty attached to him. Then the guy says the woman must be mixing things up. It's been less than a week since the two of them met. And the woman answers with a question. Does time really matter that much? Life goes by in the blink of an eye, but the connection between people sticks around. They finish their shopping and go for a walk around the place. But like always, the protagonist has to pass right through the sketchiest spots around. After walking up the shady stairs, the two stop at the edge of the fortress, and they get a perfect view of a beautiful sunset. Lemlan is enchanted by the stunning view. And our protagonist ruins it by saying that in a week this place will be attacked by a horde of monsters. The elf looks at him, shocked. Her master is really weird. Turns out, in the game's original lore, the one responsible for defending this place would be the hero Gerbier. But since that maniac already got turned to ash, the protagonist came to Alban to check out the event and find out how Alban is going to defend itself from the monster horde without a hero existing. Night falls and the night crowd is already out and about. And like any good city, the busiest place is the tavern. There some people rest while others celebrate. A bald guy raises a toast to his next hunt. Then a guy with a scar on his eye sitting at his table asks if the bald guy doesn't know who he is. Recently, he captured the Witch of the West's lackeys. But some pompous little blonde guy at the table in front cuts him off and asks this Conbell if that witch of his even exists. Scar guy gets pissed and everyone else laughs. In a corner, the protagonist just watches the scene the drunks are causing and gets second-hand embarrassment. Until someone slams a mug on the table so hard, it even spills a bit of the drink. It was a hooded guy complaining that those people were way too loud. The guy at the counter starts shaking with fear. And of course the guys didn't like the comment at all. And the scarred mercenary went to go confront the one-armed weirdo, asking what it was he said. Then the mercenary throws an arm over our buddy Flop's shoulder and gets right up in his face. The redhead looks him in the eye and repeats, "You're a bunch of loudmouths." That made Conbell mad. But before he could do anything besides talk trash, Flop punched him in the face, even making the little cheese on the table fly. Then our one-armed redhead puts his hand on the sword hilt and tells the idiot that if he wants a fight, come get it. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's quiet corner, Lemlan shows up with some skewered barbecue and asks if it's okay for Master to keep hanging around. She holds onto her little cape and reminds the guy it's already been 3 days since they arrived. Hans tells her not to question it, because adults have reasons for making certain decisions. And he tells the girl she draws a lot of attention, so she should just sit and eat a skewer. The girl starts drooling looking at that tasty little meal, but says she wouldn't dare. But the guy knows she's just being polite and tells her to just eat already. She puts her hands together and thanks him, happy as can be. While the elf happily devours her grub, Hans thinks about how he still hasn't told that kid the details. The event coming up is called the Fallen Empire's Fury, and among the many souls in the horde on the way, some have power on par with a hero. And as if that wasn't enough, there's an even worse beast leading them. Sultan Radak, the boss fight that separates the men from the boys. A huge black knight riding a horse as black as he is. And if monsters manage to take over that place, it's game over. That's it, lights out basically. If the protagonist doesn't find a way to save that place, it's over for him too. Originally, 3 people were supposed to get there after pulling off major feats. But our boy watched, live and in color. As all 3 of them bit the dust, Hans went to that specific tavern to see if anyone worth more than a copper coin would show up, but he only found until the commotion that had been harmless messing around turned into a foolin' brawl. The protagonist thinks about what a pain it is having to protect those people, then looks at Lemlan and asks if she's scared, since the girl's over there shaking like a leaf. She doesn't really say anything, and the guy goes back to sipping his beer, since there isn't much to do anyway. It's been a long time since he gave up getting involved with the other heroes. Look at these idiots throwing hands. What a joke. Already a little flushed from the drink, the guy tells the girl that the goal of the invasion coming up is to get certain items. But then, in the middle of the chaos, a wooden mug goes flying and nails the protagonist right in the head. Lemlan, who saw the whole thing, was horrified when she looked at her master and asked, kinda stuttering, if he was okay. Hans, looking like the devil himself with smoke coming out of his mouth, says it's fine, because he was starting to get bored anyway, and asks the girl for his helmet. Then the protagonist puts on the helmet, and figures those guys thought he spends all day doing nothing in the tavern, but they're wrong. Lately he's been training hard in his own way. Whelp. They messed with the wrong guy. Our boy walks up and pokes one of the troublemakers on the shoulder. Focusing on the swordsman style he got from Caddis during battles worked, but to get the most out of the power he absorbs, he can't keep relying only on skills. The troublemaker turns around, and only sees the protagonist coming at him with a punch, then he just eats a right hook to the face. Flop even stops what he was doing to watch the idiot go flying, while our guy thinks about how he doesn't exactly know what to do to keep evolving. The troublemaker he hit is foaming on the floor. So Hans decides to bring some order to the henhouse, and tells everyone there they're nothing but a bunch of chickens. And their bodies haven't even warmed up yet. Flop looks at the masked guy with zero patience, asking who this bastard is who just showed up in the middle of the fight out of nowhere. It doesn't take long for the guy to recognize the redhead. It's the lunatic who was with him when he woke up in the village of Aram a moment later. The protagonist gets worked up. Hans' memories take him back to a day he never lived, when the two of them were in the forest, and one of their friends had been skewered by a giant scale sometime after that. Hans asked Flop whether the strong survive or survivors become strong, and he answered that obviously the strong survive, but remembering that moment, he asks his friend if he really believes they survived that day because they were strong. Because honestly, if they survived that hideous creature, it was pure luck. Turns out that day, when it was the two of them's turn to become a headline, a hero came down from the sky and crushed the creature with a lightning bolt. The protagonist rests his head in his hand, shaken by the sudden trauma that wasn't even his, and ends up saying out loud that he's not interested in his memories. Then Flop asks why the guy's talking nonsense instead of fighting, but Hans just turns his back since that body reacts to the presence of the red-haired warrior. So our boy calls Lemlan and says it's time for them to leave. But before leaving, the girl looks back, catching Flop's attention. The elf was identical to the childhood friend the two of them lost on that horrible day. He gets swept up by a cruel hope and stretches out his arms, calling Elaine's name. But he quickly snaps back to reality. There's no way that could be her. After all, Elaine had already been erased from existence. A new day comes, and here we are in an equipment shop. Inside, our young guy asks Lemlan if she can use a sword. The elf answers, just a little. So he's more direct and asks if she's any good with it, and the girl says no. Then the guy asks if a bow would work, and she says she's never even touched one. The protagonist loses hope and asks if she really can't do anything. Lemlan looks down and apologizes. And he says it's fine, better to know nothing than to know something halfway, while he checks out a little dagger. Then the guy looks at the wall packed with weapons. He walks over and grabs a crossbow. Then he tosses the weapon to the girl like, heads up. She manages to catch it, and the protagonist tells her that from now on, that's her weapon. Lemlan protests she'd never used one of those before either. Our boy gives a smug little grin, and tells the little elf not to worry. She'll learn eventually. In the world of Vantablack Ring, there's a race that's despised and ignored. The White Flower tribe. Lemlan walks through the forest, and along with the crossbow, the guy also gave her a quiver of bolts. Then the girl cocks the crossbow and lines up her aim, known only for her silver hair. The tribe she comes from has a trait almost nobody knows about, an inborn sense for battle. One single experience can count as 10, or even 1,000 tries for them. Lemlan lights up when she nails the target dead center. Even though a crossbow is easier to use than a bow, it still takes weeks of non-stop training to master it. But in 3 hours, the girl is already hitting the target accurately, looks like in the White Flower tribe. Even the kids are scary while doing some mundane chores. The young guy thinks the only kind of disappointing part is that the girl's skill can't be compared to Parvel's. One of the hero's traits was the power to always hit the target, no matter how much it moved. That said, no matter how good Lemlan gets, she'll never compare to Parvel's. Then the guy cuts off the girl's training and waves his hand like, come here. The girl gets curious and walks over to the guy she still calls master. Then our boy picks up a bag from the floor and chucks it at the elf without saying anything. So she asks, right, and he says he bought some stuff she'll need, so she should go get changed. Lemlan gets all happy about the gift. Even before seeing what's inside, our guy smiles and almost makes it look like he has a heart, but that's just part of his strategy. The little elf can't be seen as a slave during this battle. Finally we reach day 0 hour, and dark clouds and black-gray skies are already rolling in. As the weather closes in, Hans looks up and can tell when the enemy has arrived. Luckily, he spent the entire last week making preparations. Then he calls out, tells the little elf it's their time, and she promptly confirms. Our girl is geared up now, okay, little gloves and everything. The protagonist knows better than anyone how cruel that world is. You can't wait around for a miracle. As the girl comes closer, Hans pats her head over her helmet. Maybe he really did make her train enough, even her aura has changed. It feels stronger and calmer. Lemlan notices her master is kind of restless and asks if he's worried. And he says no, not at all, because he's played this game like 1,000 times. And at this point the elf already had the aimbot turned on the fortress wall. The guards on watch realize something's off, and one of them rings the emergency bell, shouting a warning to all the archers they need to get into position. Alban soldiers start marching up the fort stairs to respond to the crisis. Hundreds of archers gather at the city's first line of defense. Above them, their flag raised proudly, the city's bald idiot celebrates the occasion like his moment to shine has finally come. And it doesn't look like it's just him amid the commotion before the battle. Overall, the warriors' morale is high. Among the vanguard warriors, Conbel announces with swagger that he thought he was going to get sick from waiting so long for something to happen. Flop, who was also in the front line group, recognized the back of the man with the silver-haired slave, so that was the one the apothecary was talking about. That guy over there deserved a thank you after that battle. The redhead finally has 2 arms again. The sky that looked like it was about to rain is now pitch black, covered in accursed fog, and under it a horde of black knights marches forward without mercy as it advances. The army of darkness raises the fallen empire's banner, and an inhuman voice echoes across the land, drawing the warriors' attention on the wall. At the front of the army, a spokesman slams something into the ground, stopping every soul that followed him, and the ghostly voice returns, accusing everyone there of being invaders. Then the first spear is thrown, punching through the concrete and lodging into the wall, and from it the shadows spread in every direction. The spear's threatening aura reaches the fort soldiers. Seeing it up close, the protagonist admits the intimidation really hits hard. The people who were hyped before are now shaking in their boots, and the voice echoes again, asking how they dared attack his empire and occupy it without permission. Hans, or whoever's in his body, has heard this speech so many times he can even finish the NPC's lines while he readies his arrow. The speech keeps going non-stop. This was the moment when the vengeful spirits would finally reclaim their territory. There's just one condition for Parvel's ability. The target has to be visible, so the protagonist, already tired of all that blah blah blah, lines up the first shot. From where he was, he could already clearly see some of the soldiers. Now he just has to shoot. It's not for nothing the skill's called sure shot. If you can see them, there's nothing stopping you. Our boy fires the golden arrow. It slices through the wind and hits one of the dark soldiers right in the helmet, leaving 2 others there not understanding what just happened. The minion hit by the arrow starts disintegrating on the spot and doesn't take long to stop existing down below. The melee fighters watch the scene like they just saw a guest trip and ruin the wedding cake. Meanwhile, the soldiers on the wall stare at the guy like he's walking on water. Lemlan is the only one brave enough to speak, but she just calls out, "Master?" in a shocked, questioning tone. Meanwhile, the protagonist just standing there with his cape fluttering and his feet at the edge of the fort. Weirded out by the silence, our hero looks back and sees everyone's reaction. He thought skipping a repeated cutscene was a universal rule. Black clouds haunt the sky in a spiral right above the army of darkness, whose spokesman is left speechless. That interruption was unthinkable. Then the chatty spirit screams, accusing the enemies of being cowards for attacking at the wrong time. Still, the skip worked out great for the people inside the fortress. Courage rushed back into the warriors when they saw the enemy evaporate in a single hit. The bald guy is already yelling that the dark soldiers are weaker than he thought and it was time to send them back to the grave. The protagonist, though, was thinking how that was only possible thanks to the sure shot skill, but he decided to keep quiet. Now that the stage was set, Hans tells Lemlan it's time for them to get out of there. Because things are about to get ugly. She didn't really get that part, but she's used to the guy's mysterious comments and knows there's no point asking. A whirlwind of flames forms in the sky above the battlefield, and that's what the protagonist meant, the sign that announces the start of the war. Now, farther away, the elf watches the pyromaniac show, until something leaves the girl in shock. She even looks ahead and quickens her pace to get out of there fast, while the soldiers just stand there, frozen by what they're seeing. A fireball the size of a volleyball court heads straight for the fortress wall, and the impact causes an explosion that destroys part of the fort. Anyone around there definitely didn't make it. That was the work of the sorcerers in the back line of the army of darkness, which now charges forward furiously under Radak's leadership. So, in the last chapter, that fireball showed up, right, and it left the soldiers speechless. It wrecked some stuff, sent some people to the afterlife and all. Flop got lucky he wasn't farther up front, only a few little rocks flew at him because the ones who were actually close to the gate got crushed or blown up, and the frontline warriors ended up scattering in panic. The explosion was so huge, it blew a hole in the wall, leaving nothing but rubble between one army and the other. Now, there was no other option. Alban's soldiers had to respond without the fortress protection. They'll have to fight. One of the commanders orders the archers to focus on the sorcerers before they can throw another meteor like that. In moments like this, you can tell who's an optimist and who isn't. While Conbel was talking about making money since it was 20 silver coins per monster, some random mercenary totally panicked and started yelling that it's over. Everyone's gonna pass out and he doesn't want to be there anymore. Then he runs off and tells the others he's leaving because he wants to stay alive. Nobody stops him, but Conbel and the bald guy say at the same time that that guy right there is the curse of the profession. Then Flop says that maybe running really is the best option. Even so, there were no guarantees. Then the Mosquito Airport asks if the ones who stayed have any chance of surviving. Conbel says probably not. Only if a hero shows up by some miracle. Not long after that, it's raining fireballs on the city, and the Dark Warriors are cutting down everyone who shows up in front of them. What there isn't lacking on that ground is balls for a game. The word mercy doesn't exist in those creatures' dictionary. The current Empire soldiers are getting massacred, but some mercenaries are still managing to hold their own. Once they were pierced through, the Black Knights evaporated. That Conbel guy is on the verge of a breakdown. He almost got taken out. He was super confident in his mercenary skills, but he ended up getting a lesson in humility. Now that there wasn't any enemy on his tail, he took the chance to take a look at how his companions were doing. Just in time to see the bald guy splitting one of the enemies in half while the mercenary fought. He was hyping himself up and everyone around him, reminding them all that if they lose there, the next ones will be their families. Then the bald guy jumps to the next enemy, cutting another soldier of darkness in half. Man, I wasn't expecting anything from this guy. Then our little bald dude tells the others to look closely. They're not doing as bad as they expected, but he spoke too soon. Right behind him came one of the heroic level spirits, asking if the warrior really should get cocky for beating a few little mosquitoes. Only before the mercenary could answer, he was already seeing the world upside down. The Dark Captain showed up like the Grim Reaper himself to deliver the message. The enemy's presence is crushing. Even the air around him seems cursed. And to him, everyone there was nothing but invaders, who must be exterminated and wiped out from his old land. Conbel looked at that and all he could say was, "We're screwed." Now it was his turn. Then the possessed armor leaps toward the next mercenary, who threatens him with his spear, even knowing it wouldn't do any good. Conbel's attack only dispersed the tip of the Dark Captain's shadow cloak, who was already behind the mercenary, ready to turn him into history. Then Scarface already went into full, and now who's gonna save me mode. Luckily, his joke about the miracle hero wasn't that absurd after all. Before the spirit could finish off Conbel, a mounted warrior jumped in between them. They weren't counting on his cunning. The guy can't tell if he just got the luckiest break ever, or if he's already hallucinating. And it looks like the biggest weakness of this kind of enemy is how easily they get distracted. Then the protagonist's horse throws a punch at the Captain of Darkness, then it gallops over him, trampling the cursed shadow like it's a rat. And it's not a coincidence either. The horse is really furious. The army must have destroyed all the pasture along the way. In the end, the horse finished off the Dark Captain with a front kick. Hans didn't even have to do anything. Riding his thoroughbred and accompanied by his elf child, the protagonist asks Conbel if he's okay. And he says he's okay. The mounted hero notices the mercenary really does seem fine. Then he tells the guy not to waste time and to warn the others to fall back, and finally said he was heading out. The protagonist tells Lemlan they're leaving, and she, without many options up there on the horse, just agreed. Gotta have faith. Conbel held out his arm like he wanted to point out the enemy was in that direction. But that was obvious. The guy's nuts. And the warrior stood there watching the unexpected trio dive into the darkness. It doesn't take long for the closest enemies to notice the sudden arrival. Then the protagonist asks Lemlan to clear the way. There were two ways to stop the swarm of vengeful spirits. One of them was defeating all of them. But that would take way too long. Which brings us to the second alternative. Go straight for the boss with the support of the elf's perfect aim. Hans focuses on the right side, carving out a path himself all the way to the general. From a bit farther back, Conbel watches his savior, wondering if that guy isn't afraid of his own end. It's like he's a hero. The protagonist's horse keeps charging forward like a bull. They've already made it to the outside of the wall and cleared the way in the process, and the huge horde of soldiers keeps marching toward them without hesitating. All those vengeful spirits move like an elite unit. Even so, they can't overcome the limits of their own nature using the riding skill inherited from Gerbier, combined with Caddis' mastery of spear technique. The protagonist reached supreme cavalry and became a one-man army. Well, a man with a little elf girl. From there, it's easy to carve a path, cutting through the elite soldiers like they're nothing but thick brush. A wall of possessed armor waits for the enemies to come closer. There, the army unit that protects the general. Sultan Radak finds it really intriguing that someone of that caliber exists in that little town. So he decides to see what this mysterious mounted warrior is about, slamming his axe into the ground and saying he can come when the iron hits the ground. His cursed aura spreads like dozens of dark arrows, wrapping the armor of all the remaining vengeful spirits in a single gesture. Hans notices the strange movement and decides to pull the horse's reins, stopping for the first time since he entered the battle and almost knocking poor Lemlan off. When she looks ahead, the elf realizes the path is clear now. Looks like the red-haired dark General Radak is calling our boy out for a 1v1. So the protagonist tells Lemlan to get off the horse in the middle of that pile of enemies, leaving the girl in shock, but he explains she doesn't need to worry and promises those soldiers there won't attack them. Even so, she climbs down all awkward, poor thing, shaking with fear. The Sultan then comments that the warrior managed to get there alone. Then the guy looks at the kid next to him and says he wasn't alone. Radak gets annoyed at the mockery and raises his right arm, asking what reason the warrior has to walk toward his own end. Then the little soldiers start moving again, and they surround their enemies, pointing their spears. At that moment, Lemlan's soul practically leaves her body, but the protagonist tells her to stay quiet and pulls something out of the backpack she's carrying. Then he tosses forward what looks like a piece of cloth, and Hans' little handkerchief lands right in front of the general. The Sultan glances at the lackey beside him. He's not going to bend down to pick that up, right? So the subordinate spirit nods, yes. Understanding the silent command, he bends down elegantly, calm as can be, and picks up the piece of cloth to hand it to his superior. Then Radak takes a look and notices it's the crest of a knightly house. Then asks the protagonist if he's a knight. Right away our guy says yes. The truth is, throwing a piece of cloth with the crest of a knightly house is the traditional way for knights to challenge someone to a duel, and that spirit belonged to a man who valued honor above everything, the general of the fallen empire, Sultan Radak. Radak lets out a dry laugh. Looks like even in times of chaos and destruction, tradition still exists in reality. That cloth was a cheap custom order the guy had made, but there was no way the general could know that. So the protagonist puts on a show and announces that even though today he's a vengeful spirit, the general used to be a knight of great honor. And he shouts to Sultan Radak that he challenges him to a duel for honor. Then there's a moment of silence. Everyone just stares at each other, kind of waiting for an answer. Our little elf girl about to have a stroke. And even Hans himself is already getting anxious at the lack of a response. The guy grips the horse's reins tight, thinking that if this is a refusal, now's the time to get the hell out. But Sultan Radak breaks the silence with a roar of satisfaction. He's thrilled that even in that filthy age, there's still a knight who understands what honor is. Then he asks the guy if that elf girl there was his squire, and the protagonist answers that she's basically that. Then the general announces that even if this is where the protagonist meets his end, he carries a knight's honor in this rotten world, and since the elf is his squire, shall be included under the justice of the duel. Still playing the honorable knight, our guy agrees. And just like planned, Lemlan wouldn't be attacked during the duel. Now all that was left was the hardest part of all. Right, Sultan Radak declares that a true knight doesn't refuse a challenge and summons his devilish chestnut. All bros. Then the general starts riding toward the battle, but first, he introduces himself as Sultan Radak, the general and the son of the Ruben Empire. Then asks the name of his challenger. The protagonist probably didn't see that coming, but he answers as fast as he can right there that his name is Evan. Anyway, Radak points the spear at the boy and announces that this duel will be the testament of their names. Then Evan asks Lemlan to take a step back. She starts to protest, and he reminds her he already said she's not supposed to argue with him, so Even if reluctant, the little elf obeys and tells her master to be careful. And finally, Radak roars to the four corners of the world that the duel between knights has begun. Up to now, the boss's attack patterns have been the same as in Vantablack Ring. The reckless claw attacks of the Wolfrican King, Durkin, the openings between each axe swing from the Minotaur dialect, the way Etro switched between attacking with his roots and pushing enemies back with his scream, Hommel's powerful attacks. Relentless, but dependent on a lot of stability. So, with Sultan Radak it wouldn't be any different. So there was no reason to get excited, and the protagonist decided to just charge straight at the general. The sooner it was over, the better. But when the Sultan realized there wasn't a trace of fear in our hero's movement, he decided to reward his courage by striking back with all his strength. Then the general starts to shift his stance. The axe that had been pointing down is now resting on the shoulder plate of his armor. Then the protagonist slows down for some reason. Sultan Radak switched from normal combat to berserk mode. The sky isn't as weird and sinister anymore. Like always, the light is full, and there are no stars. Poor Lemlan is there in the stands, side by side with the enemies. One of them is interested in the fight, and the other has his eyes on the elf just by looking at her master. She can already tell something's different in the air, and she wonders if something went wrong. Our hero then pulls the reins and stops advancing to think about the new situation. Hans thinks about how Radak deciding to switch to berserk mode was completely unexpected, and wonders why the hell that happened in Vantablack Ring. When Sultan Radak is really close to being defeated, he switches to berserker mode, which dramatically boosts his combat power. Now the protagonist is going to have to change strategy when the boss is in this state. You have to deal with his horse first. The problem is whether, in his current condition, Hans can handle that beast in rage mode. Radak asks the boy why he stopped moving, but it was a rhetorical question because right after that, the general says that in that case, Hell make the first move. Then Albraz cuts across the battlefield like a missile. And since the protagonist already knows what comes next, he gets his defense ready. Radak raises his axe like he's about to split the planet in half. Hans redirects the attack with the tip of the spear. If he hadn't played this game so much, this would be a huge problem. One of the first hero Kata's specialties is deflecting the enemy's attack and making them lose balance, and for that, the protagonist needed to take the next hit. The general pulls the axe back, setting up a cross strike, and tells his opponent to perish with honor. Then he throws his second attack, a ruthless slash. Hans uses the shaft of the spear to stop the blade. The general's blade slams into the shaft with so much force that sparks fly. He needed to redirect the attack at the peak of its power. The protagonist almost bends his weapon, but manages to shove the enemy's blow away. Stretching out Radak's right arm and making him tip a bit to the side. At first it works, but the next moment the enemy regains his balance. That damn horse managed to force the general back into position. The protagonist thinks about how this hell of a game made it clear the boss mount was exceptional, but nowhere did it say the horse did that. Noticing his opponent's confidence had been shaken, Sultan Radak starts laughing and asks if something went wrong. Our dear Hans/Evan gets pissed that NPC was messing with him, but soon he'd make him regret it. The clash keeps going at epic scale, the impact of the blades meeting echoing for miles. And it's spear this way, axe that way, horse trotting, armor clanking once again. The general starts laughing and praises the hero for holding up so well. But then he lands a hit, striking Hans' bracer. The protagonist thinks about how just staying on defense won't get him anywhere. But Alban keeps messing with the distance between him and his opponent. Radak swings his axe like your opponent's got time to think and charges again. And this time he nails Hans in the ribs. The main character's eyes keep watching the hell horse's legs. Now the guy's gonna have to figure out how to deal with a tear in his abdomen. Because of the pain, the hero ends up getting distracted. But he quickly notices the shift in aura and snaps back. Radak raised the axe to the sky and started gathering his reddish darkness at the tip. The main character recognizes the attack and knows that one's no joke. Then the general announces that now it's time to kick the bucket. But the guy refuses to pass out in a place like that, so he yanks the reins, sharply changing direction and wrenching the poor horse sideways. The two animals end up crashing, and the main character stands up on his mount. Radak readies another attack after saying that was a useless move. But then the main character surprises him and jumps off the horse, straight onto the enemy's axe. Another advantage of the fighting style he inherited from Cadus is that he gets buffed every time he takes an aggressive stance. Hans manages to break through Radak's attack and gets ready to drive the spear in, and he says that this is an attack to put an end to the clown show. Catching the general off guard still in midair, the main character already tells the Sultan there's no way he can dodge this. Radak sees the spear coming and gets ready to avoid it. But the target of that attack wasn't the general. Hans lands a direct hit on the shadowy chestnut, driving the spear straight through Alboran's head. When the guy lands on the ground, Radak is no longer mounted, and his axe is stuck in the ground. The main character finally managed to get rid of the horse and cut down the enemy's mobility, but he burned a lot of energy in the process. While Cadus abilities are powerful and explosive, they also end up consuming an insane amount of stamina. Even using Gerbier's strength as a boost, the difference in consumption was minimal. And at this point, every muscle in our hero's body is already screaming. Radak then starts talking. He says it's been a long time. He can't even remember the last time someone managed to knock him off his horse, and he admitted it was smart to focus on the horse instead of him. However, he finished by saying that was the most the hero would be able to do. Then, the general held out his hand and called Alboran back to him, absorbing the mount and turning it into his new weapon, a long sword. Just as dark as the rest of the beast's whole vibe. Then the vengeful spirit points the blade's tip at our already pretty beat-up hero, and says that he, Sultan Radak IV, would wipe him out with his strength and all his power. Lemlan, who was still watching that odyssey, got worried about where the battle was headed. Soon, someone comes walking up behind the elf, saying he came to see why the war suddenly stopped out of nowhere. Our little elf girl looks to the side to see who the sneaky one was, and the guy stops right next to her. Then Flop asks Lemlan what the current situation was, and she answers that her master had said he'd be able to end the war. Then the redhead asks if that's really the case, because it looks like her master is losing, and maybe she shouldn't help him. The elf explains that the instructions she was given were not to question it, and not to get involved. Flop is surprised and asks if he's like some old school guy, then says it might not be his business, but she should act when she felt it was time. Because once you lose something, there's no going back. Meanwhile, Radak is darker and more pissed off than ever. You can tell the artist really likes this guy. The main character thinks he's totally screwed now. The general won't even give him time to grab his weapon back. Since he was forced into the game world with no system or anything, he can't even access an inventory and pull out something else. In that realistic mode, it was way more complicated to carry gear around. Then Hans yells to Lemlan that he needed the extra sword they'd prepared, and she starts digging through the bag like a maniac. How a whole sword gets lost inside a bag is the question. Radak judges the hero's gesture as pathetic, and he uses his unreal speed to close the distance between him and the main character, who's already thinking it might be too late. From the stands, Flop tells Lemlan that if she doesn't get ready ahead of time, she'll fail at crucial moments. Then the adventurer shouts to get the Tin Can guy's attention while tossing him his own sword. The protagonist sees the gear flying toward him. As payment for the new arm, Flop's sword might be closing in fast, but Radak's is too. Hans manages to catch the sword's hilt midair and force it out of the scabbard, just in time to stop the general's strike again. The clash of blades is so strong it echoes across the battlefield this time. The energy from both of them even forms a little heart. They end up face to face in a power struggle. Radak says that's not enough and he wants more, and Hans thinks about how ridiculous the gap in their strength is, but once again, the hero manages to use Cadus' ability to redirect the attack, separating them yet again. Then there's another panel showing only the moon, and Lemlan is still digging through the bag. Flop watches her with curiosity. Man, that bag has to be like those ant purses that are basically a black hole inside. But it looks like this time the girl is looking for something specific to help her master. Radak keeps going relentlessly, blow after blow, leaving Hans with no real option except to stay on the defensive. Then the general complains and says the hero used to be better, but the protagonist is waiting for a specific moment, when the enemy will already be used to his sword fighting style. Until then, our hero has to hold on as long as he can. So Hans decides to talk some nonsense because he's already noticed these vengeful spirits love wasting time chatting, and it works. Radak starts laughing again. He likes the hero's determination. The general says that, at the very least, his willpower deserves recognition. That was the moment he was waiting for. The enemy slowed down his attacks to mock the hero. Our boy yanks Flop's sword with all his strength and throws it at the knight, who just uses his sword to block the attack and doesn't understand a damn thing. The sword goes flying way off into nowhere and sticks into the ground behind the scenes. The hero's cheering section, made up of 2 people, doesn't understand anything, and the redhead mourns that maybe his weapon just became history. Then Radak admits he misjudged our guy. And now that he's figured out how his attack pattern works, it's time to end that duel once and for all. In this cruel world, the general has the power to command an entire army of knights without any effort. On top of that, the guy is totally busted. That said, our protagonist never once planned to win fair and square, so he left some little doom rocks in his pouch. Right, Hans uses his signature move called Rocks Atom, and chucks the item at the general. Radak slices the rock in half before it even gets close and says that was a pointless attack. Then the knight realizes that wasn't just any little rock taking advantage of the opening. The protagonist yells to Lemlan asking if she's ready, only this time the weapon was already basically reaching him. The elf took Flop's words to heart, and now her last name is prepared. Meanwhile, Sultan Radak is kinda busy with a last-second explosion. Another panel showing how pretty the moon is through the smoke. The general's figure remains untouched, and he starts making a scene, asking if the boy really thought that would work against him. Our hero, now holding a trident that only God knows how it fit in that bag, answers that he actually has other plans for him. Radak looks at the guy and asks if he's messing with him. Bringing something like that to a battle, the protagonist, holding his fishing net, looks confused and swears he hasn't stopped being serious for even a second. Once again, the general is left speechless, and all those years had never seen anything like that lunatic. And then he comments that the hero calls himself a knight, using tactics like that, and asks if he really thinks that would work. As expected, the general was underestimating the hero for using a little net, which was good for him, since the win here is going to be psychological. Then comes the moment that will decide the outcome of that battle. The protagonist asks what kind of knight is prejudiced against certain weapons, and Radak yells back, outraged, saying not even the knights from fishing towns would use a weapon that bizarre. Then Hans plays dumb as best he can, and asks if it was part of the general's knight code to look down on his opponent. Once again the villain is in shock. What the hell was this sicko talking about? No way. But our boy was a gamer and knows how effective trash talk is against really proud players, so he asks if later the general isn't gonna cry to his lackeys. Radak goes absolutely nuts with rage, and stomps the ground so hard that if there was a dragon sleeping within 100 kilometers, it would have woken up. Then he takes the bait, and does exactly what Hans wanted. He yells to all his knights that no matter what happens, they must not interfere in that duel. He even points his arm at the soldiers and says that order comes from Sultan Radak himself. The army hesitates a bit. Even the dumbest guy there knew that was a bad idea. But what can you do? One by one, the weapons start getting stuck into the ground. So all the rows of knights wait for the end of the battle unarmed, with their hands open at their sides. Flop wonders what the hell is going on, and Lemlan, who's already used to the shenanigans, can't wait for it to be over. This time the one laughing is our hero, like the saying goes, and the hypocrite Radak gets nervous again. So, the Sultan starts gathering more of his sinister aura in his free hand, summoning a fancy shield to match the aesthetic and the color palette. The enemy's aura is so strong that Hans has to shield himself with his arms. No way he could beat that guy at his current skill level. If this were the first time Head fought him, of course. The protagonist already gets Parvel's skill ready in the hand holding the net, and he waits patiently for the right moment, while the general comes in like a bullet train at the right distance. Hans gets ready to throw, and he tosses the net at the Sultan. Damn, that's a big catch. Radak lets out a dry laugh. The guy really threw that little thing at him. And then he swings his sword in front of him to cut the fishing tool. But that was a net made from the trunk of a special tree. It wouldn't be cut that easily, so the Sultan gets stuck in the little net, and realizes he just got played. That bastard knight from Talbot used holy water on that trap. Then the protagonist starts pulling off his hood and says he forgot to mention he upgraded the net with silver and holy water. The general calls him a coward, while he thrashes around in the net like a fish. Then Hans, who even took off his helmet to show the general who his fisherman is, says justice was pointless in a fight for survival. Then he gives the enemy a smug little grin and admits the whole point was to get out of there alive, and the tables have turned. Now it was his turn to hurt. Up in the stands, Flop recognizes right away who the soda can guy was. Hans, his childhood friend. This time the moon panel includes the protagonist and his opponent, trapped in a fishing net. Anyway, our boy, now without his helmet, manages to take a good breath. This was tough. At least the next part of the plan seems chill. Back in his gaming days, there was a silver trident the protagonist hadn't managed to get, and some insanely expensive holy water impossible to buy as a beginner on a first playthrough. But now he basically had a PhD in this game, so the first thing he did was rob the Minotaur's vault. On top of carrying the memories and skills of 3 different heroes, he walks without rushing toward his catch. Meanwhile, he thinks that somehow his huge experience playing Vantablack Ring actually came in handy, and even after playing like 1,000 times, you could still lose everything in a simple Fortress of Alban raid event. Yeah, right, he was gonna go there without a plan B, C, or D in his previous world. Back in ancient Rome, Colosseum gladiators fought for their lives. Among them, there was a gladiator called Auriciarius, who won countless battles with his unique fighting style, which was to lock down the enemy's movement with a net, then spear him with a trident. Exactly like our hero is about to do now to the general. A metallic, deafening sound echoes through the duel site. Hans hit the Dark Knight in the exact same spot where had been. And then Radak starts thinking, yeah, it's true, the net limited his movements. It was also true that holy water and weapons made of silver work against him. But there was something even crazier about this whole situation. The hero's fighting style changed completely out of nowhere. The general rips the net apart, yelling how something like that was even possible, but the protagonist's reaction is just to flash a sly little grin. The net simply reformed and flew back to the knight. Then our guy asks him if he really thought it was going to be that easy. Radak knew that if he didn't get out of there, he'd be defeated. So Hans attacks him again with the trident. Like this, it wasn't hard at all. Pretty soon the Sultan's gonna turn into Swiss cheese. The general manages to split the net again using his sword. But the protagonist isn't in the mood to deal with him and just sends the net right back, so Radak throws his shield into the net before it comes back to him, so he'd have time to dodge before it reached him. But to the dark dude's despair, there was already a second net coming. Then our guy asks him if he really thinks they only fought once or twice. And at first, the general is confused. But then he starts putting 2 and 2 together in his head, and it made sense. The maniac found a way to get to him alone. Then he managed to convince him to enter a duel. And he had with him a blessed net, plus a silver trident. Not exactly something you pick up at the dollar store. There was no doubt this guy had planned everything that happened up to now. Even so, Radak refused to believe it. That wasn't possible. This success had to be just a coincidence, and he decided to think that out of everything that happened up to then, the protagonist's last words were just nonsense to mess with him. The protagonist comes at him again with his silver trident, asking if it wouldn't be better for his opponent to just give up. This time the protagonist pierced the vengeful spirit's breastplate while Radak shakes with rage. His aura grows. If that bastard was a knight, he should use his sword and fight with honor. Truth is, even now Hans is bluffing. And the way he's exhausted, he's only got one more shot. Which is enough. The general breaks free once again from the blessed fishing net. Radak needed to be at that level of emotional meltdown for Hans to be able to beat him. Mind games, people. Hans throws another net at the enemy, who yells that that was a mistake. Then the guy just repeats the earlier question, do you really think I only fought you once or twice? Radak loses it and asks what the hell that kid is talking about. And he answers that he's never seen that miserable bastard in his life, leaping into a fury-filled attack. Then the protagonist takes a little step to the side and avoids getting torn in half, finally finding the opening he needed, the opening he spent a week making plans for and pulled all those tricks for. Conveniently, Cadus had a skill called Silver Moon Spear Technique, where Hans will pour in everything he has left, combining the technique with Gerbier's body reinforcement. Our guy bets on the final blow. The golden beam of light hits the knight's abdomen dead on, blowing a hole in his armor. Right after that, the general implodes and starts to evaporate. His core had been split in half. The general's aura turns into a pillar of reddish darkness that rises up to the sky. Then the rest of the army also starts to fall apart. Radak, your place is in a museum. Lemlan is still standing in the same spot, but Flop moved closer to watch the scene up close. Sultan Radak lets out a scream as he stops existing inside the pillar of power. Curiously, the knight's last words call out to your majesty. The glare comes down from the heavens, turning into a thin line of what was left of the boss, and a tiny glow in the middle. All that was left of the general was a cord floating where he was defeated, which means the event of the invasion of Alban Fortress was successfully completed. That necklace was a secret artifact that could only be obtained by beating Radak in a 1v1. Hans holds the accessory in his hand, The pendant was a platinum shield with a ruby in the middle and an onyx on top. Even though it was a massive pain in the ass to get that, it was a really good artifact to get ready for an even worse future. Flop cuts into his thoughts by yelling the name of the owner of that body, and the protagonist is like, damn, I forgot this guy was here. The post-battle against the general of the vengeful spirit army left a beautiful aurora borealis in the sky. Surrounded by greenish points of light, Lemlan had already retrieved the helmet Hans dropped during the battle. She can't lose that, right? Then the little elf just watches from afar, as the guy who came out of nowhere goes to demand answers from her master. The redhead yells the protagonist's current name again, and our guy just stands there looking, trying to figure out what this lunatic wants. Flop grabs him by the cloak and asks what the hell is going on, and what someone like him was doing in a place like that. Then the protagonist tells the guy to chill because he's not that Hans, leaving the warrior confused, but soon Flop starts talking again, telling him to stop messing around. Then the redhead gives a tired smile and says there was no way he wouldn't recognize him. Then the guy thinks for a second and comes to the conclusion that that idiot wouldn't believe him if he told the truth. Besides, it'd be a total pain, so the protagonist lets out a long sigh. He just keeps finding ways to pile up trouble. Flop asks his friend to say something, but our young man is already coming in with an answer in the form of a punch. Lemlan watches that scene completely horrified. So the protagonist walks past her and says they're leaving, and the girl looks kind of confused, but Hans turns to her and, dead serious, says they're getting the hell out of there immediately, and if she wants to stay there, she can. But the girl perks up right away and says there's no way she's staying there. So she follows him and begs him not to abandon her. Truth is, it looks like the protagonist's heart of stone has started to make a little room for the elf. Now that his job there was done, our hero needed to get out as fast as possible. Because now that had drawn so much attention to himself, certain individuals would be on his tail any minute now, and poor Flop was passed out in the middle of nowhere. A flashback starts to the day the village of Aram caught fire and vanished off the map. A survivor wandered through the flaming ruins. Flop walked through a real vision of hell, people dead everywhere, creatures taken down, and the whole place on fire. The village had been wiped out, only he was still standing. Still, among the piles of bodies, there was no sign of Hans. Did he survive? Worse than the doubt was the excruciating pain of the missing limb at his right shoulder. Flop wonders what the hell happened while he was unconscious, but now, the first thing to do was find Hans. Even with no idea whether his friend was alive or not, the redhead started looking for him everywhere. The first time he ran into a monster, he was still kind of traumatized, but he convinced himself it was nothing like the Wolfrican boss. And he took the creature out in an instant, saving an adventurer who was being attacked by the beast. Then Flop showed the woman his awful drawing of Hans, and she hadn't seen anyone who looked like that. The redhead kept going, wiping out countless monsters and helping a bunch of people, but no clue about his friend. Looking for him started to feel like a curse. Until at some point, the adventurer finally collapsed, but he was found by the apothecary from Alban. But that tough-as-nails woman hadn't seen anyone who looked like that masterpiece either. The only reason Flop went that far was friendship. Finding Hans in the middle of the war against the army of darkness was a huge shock. Even more shocking was that friend's reaction to being found. A solid smack to the face. Far from there, another moon panel, but with a bunch of creepy little owls and one cute one. The protagonist had already set up camp in the forest, and now he was messing with a leaf in front of the campfire. Lemlan then asks the master why he was doing that. Hans burned the leaves like it was incense. He explains that the plant was called Pulvenso herb, and burning it gave off a smell that kept monsters from coming close. Then the guy shows the leaf, and explains that charring them for 30 minutes kept monsters away for 12 hours. Then he tells Lemlan to try putting one on the fire. After half an hour burning the plant, the two of them watch the fire. Hans lost in his thoughts, and the elf kind of restless, but both silent. Until the girl gets the guy's attention, and he asks what she wants. Lemlan admits she's curious. Our guy is loaded, and knows how to use a bunch of different weapons, and she'd like to know who he really is. But the protagonist just says he's an ordinary wanderer, which she thinks is ridiculous. The elf tries to argue that she's met ordinary wanderers before, but Hans shuts her up. The winds of change reach the duo, and a figure in silver armor approaches. Lemlan tries to warn the master about the unexpected arrival, but he tells her not to bother because they're already surrounded anyway. Now our duo was surrounded by a group of hooded knights, but that's also something that always happens in Vantablack Ring. Lemlan gets ready to fight, and asks the master for moral support. Then a blonde knight walks up, noting that an adventurer traveling with a white elf servant might be that wandering knight Evan. Our hero says maybe it is, then asks who those people are. The blonde introduces himself as Albrecht Kelvin, commander of the 5th Division of Knights of the Kingdom of Pinstanch. Then he puts his little hand on his armor and says he's at the guy's service. Yeah right, sure. Evan Hans de Silva plays dumb, and asks what brought the Knights of Pinstanch all the way out there. So Albrecht says that if it's not too much trouble, the protagonist should come with them, and Hans asks why the invite. And the lunatic has the nerve to say the reason is a secret, with a smile and everything. Then our hero asks what happens if he says no. Albrecht says that then, unfortunately, he'll have to be rude about it, so the protagonist says he can't make a knight act rude. So he'll cooperate for now, and the shameless blonde guy thanks him for his cooperation. These people use the Emperor's name as a shield to pull their swords whenever things don't go their way. Like always, the Knights of Pinstanch are followed by a bunch of thugs. There's no way to like them. Hans slips into a half-battle stance for a moment, and studies the situation carefully if he wanted to go against the knight's order. First he'd have to take out the pretty boy in front of him with a surprise attack. Then use the Kita style to strike the one farther back, and rush the rest before they can form up. Then he remembers Lemlan is with him, and she could easily be taken hostage. And since he still doesn't have 100 mastery of the Kita style, there'd be no way to save her. So the protagonist decides to let it go. Still staring at Albrecht, Hans cancels his attack. Then the unbearable blonde asks the hero if he plans to resist. Hans waves his little hand and says, no way he's doing something like that, even annoyed at the lack of freedom. There's no real evil in that forced escort. Lemlan just stands there wondering why the master is looking her way with an angry face. Then the guy tries to convince himself he was already planning to go with them, and uses the sword hilt to bonk the little elf on the head. Then he starts following Albrecht and tells the girl to pack up the camp. The knight warns that there's already a carriage waiting for them at the side of the road, and the protagonist replies sarcastically that it's very kind of them. On the outside, Albrecht even laughs, but in truth, he realized the boy considered finishing him off. A few seconds ago, you could clearly see the intent to wipe him out in the protagonist's eyes, along with the slight change in foot placement. So the knight watches the boy's back in silence. People have a specific stance depending on the they train with, and what this Evan used was a swordsman stance, which could mean head mastered more than one kind of weapon, but then the knight decides that's impossible, and he must have seen wrong because he's pretty tired, because if that were true, the boy would be an unmatched genius. Then everyone gets into the carriage and off they go. On the way, Hans notices the elf looks more scared than usual and asks what's wrong. Lemlan, clinging to the protagonist's arm, explains there are too many men there. Then she closes her eyes and says she doesn't like being in the middle of a bunch of men. Then Hans reminds the girl that he's a man too, but he actually has an idea of what might be going on. When he first found the girl, she was being sold on the black market. It was probably men who captured her, but in Alban, she didn't seem that uncomfortable around the soldiers. The girl was probably captured and sold by knights, probably by the army, so he decides hell, let her cling to him just this once. Man, it's been a while since we saw a moon panel. The protagonist looks out the window and tells the elf that even though they're heading to Pinstanch, they'll have to stop somewhere first. He says it's going to be a lot of trouble for the knights, and finally he says that's their problem, and for now both of them should rest. Then the two of them take a little nap there, close together. Who would have thought the cold-hearted protagonist would turn into the big brother type? Lemlan is the last one to fall asleep before that. She thinks about that weird guy who was always rude and tried to abandon her, but always took care of her and kept her safe. While the elf was thinking about how amazing the master was, he's dreaming about one of those moments where nothing goes right in life. But even so, she felt safe there still. She can't stop thinking that the day he finds out about her pendant will be the day he starts to hate her. Could she have something to do with the protagonist reincarnating there? Her pendant is a bluish shiny stone jewel with some kind of rune embedded in it. Morning comes, and the guy driving the carriage is almost nodding off. That shameless little morning sun hits the protagonist right in the eyes, and he wakes up. Even after a few hours of sleep, the exhaustion from the battle against Radak was still in his body. Even with all that power, the guy is sure he's not using his own potential as well as he could. These last few days he's been trying to fit together the abilities inherited from the three heroes, but he still hasn't managed it, having to use incomplete abilities that wear his body out way more. While the hero thinks about how he needs to harmonize the three abilities, Lemlan's over having a nightmare about Hans trying to abandon her again. Poor thing, to reach his goal, the protagonist needs to make sure they take a specific route, and he reveals they're close to the village of Voxel. Then he opens the window to talk to the annoying guy, who jumps and asks if something's wrong. Once again, Hans goes into character mode and says he'd like to avoid that road, and then Albrecht asks if he can know why, so he switches into actor mode and pretends to be terrified, saying he heard around that up ahead there's a village taken over by an epidemic. The blonde guy even turns pale, something like that could wipe the village off the map. Then the protagonist adds that he doesn't want to get involved while traveling with a child, but the knight says that's even more reason for them to go there, and the protagonist looks him straight in the eye and asks if he knows what the word epidemic means. Then the annoying guy smiles and says not to worry among the knights. There was a cleric who could cure even the Black Plague. He even has the nerve to say they're the benevolent knights of Pinstantia and couldn't ignore a situation like that. But that was exactly what Hans wanted to hear. Time passes, and finally, they manage to spot the village of Kyrat behind the woods. Everyone's already all happy the knights arrived. Like they weren't just passing by on coincidence, right? The poor people are so desperate they don't think twice before asking for help polishing up his reputation. Albrecht orders his unit to check if there are monsters nearby and tells the cleric to heal women and children first. The protagonist gets out of the carriage and does that big stretch, one of the few things he actually likes in his life. Then he asks if he can patrol the place alone. At first the captain agrees, but he quickly warns him not to go too far, pretending it's out of concern. Well, he's right to think it's the work of a monster, but wrong to think it's the fault of any of the creatures around here. Then he calls over the poor little elf girl who isn't even 50 awake, and she startles. Anyway, he tells her to sort the luggage. That village was being affected by the greenish moss disease, which little by little feeds on the host's body and grows across their skin. And if it isn't cured in time, it causes the patient's death. A woman whose skin and bones, poor thing, sees the protagonist walking by. Then the beggar goes over to him right away, begging for water, and the protagonist looks at her like she's an insufficient balance screen. Then the woman explains her son is dehydrated and begs for just a little water, but Hans just turns his back and walks away. Only our little elf girl feels bad for the people, you know? So she asks the master to reconsider. Hans gets frustrated with the elf's soft heart. Then he pulls out Flop's sword. Well, it's probably his now. Right from his waist. Poor Lemlan gets confused and points at the beggars, telling them to keep their distance. Finally, she warns them not to dare come closer. Then the beggar gets nervous, right? Asking the guy not to kill her. But to everyone's surprise, the protagonist tells Lemlan to get water from the bag. She even asks if she heard right, and he confirms. Then the girl agrees, happy as can be, thinking about how considerate her master is. She's so delusional. So she immediately hands him the water also. Yeah, if she took as long as she did back when the sword was ready, people would die of thirst. And Hans splashes the water on the woman without even warning her. The poor beggar couldn't believe it when the little water pouch fell into her hand. Then the protagonist tells her to take that water and get the hell out. The woman thanks the silver-haired child, all emotional, and Hans makes this dumb face because she not only thanked them instead of getting the hell out, she also thanked Lemlan. Our little elf girl thanks the master for helping the beggar, and he says it's fine, but she needs to be careful, because that disease spreads by contact. The girl is horrified and asks if it spreads just from touching. He confirms and tells her not to touch anyone there besides him. Lemlan feels relieved knowing that if they didn't touch people, they'd be safe. Then the protagonist asks if, understanding what he said, she's still going to help those people, and the little elf says she won't if he tells her not to. Hans thinks about how he has absolutely no reason to help the beggars. But if he just leaves, Lemlan is going to keep thinking about it, so the guy tells the elf he's going to dock the water from her pay. It takes the girl a second to get it, but she agrees without any trouble. Finally, the heartless one tells Lemlan that if she gets infected, hell, leave her there. She agrees, still all upbeat, because by this point she probably doubts that's true. Then the protagonist steps away and tries to remember the events that can be unlocked in that event. If he can't remember, they're probably not important. Lemlan finishes handing out water in the square and goes over to Hans. The little elf thanks him. You can tell she's really happy. But the protagonist just lifts the girl up by her bag and says that since she helped the beggars, they better not try anything. Then he sits her down on the edge of the well and asks her to promise him something. The elf asks what it is. He answers, accusing her that while she's with him, She can't help anyone without permission. Lemlan agrees, but still doesn't get what she's doing there by the well. But he just finishes the warning by saying that helping people without thinking can end up getting her hurt, and shoves the poor little elf completely shocked into the well. Hans lands at the bottom of the well at the same time. Lemlan falls in after him like a sack of potatoes. He notes the place is just like he expected, and the elf's down there, poor thing, like her soul's leaving her body. The protagonist keeps watching while he decides what to do first. Even though it's the bottom of a well, it's lit up. In front of the two of them, there's a tunnel with lit torches. Lemlan asks where they are, while Hans takes the helmet from her hand. Then the guy explains they're in the sewers of Karet, the source of the city's disease, and they're entering the territory of the monster that runs that place out of nowhere. He turns to the elf and warns that if she keeps following him, she might kick the bucket, and then a rat the size of a Rottweiler jumps on him. Hans quickly pulls a dagger from inside his cloak. Then he slices the rat open and asks Lemlan if she's going to follow him anyway. The rat hit the ground, not even knowing what train just ran it over. The girl hesitates for a moment and looks at the rat with disgust. Man, what an ugly thing, and that green stuff coming out of it, how messed up is a rat with fangs? In the end, Lemlan nods, she'll follow her master. Then Hans puts in her hand the dagger he just used to butcher the rat. The little elf makes the most blank, clueless face possible, not understanding what that meant. Then the protagonist reminds her he already taught her the basics. Lemlan complains and says she feels more comfortable using the crossbow, but Hans just asks how long she plans to keep lurking at a distance, and says it's time she learned to use a sword. It's kind of harsh, but it's for the elf's own good if she wanted to survive in that world. She needed every kind of experience. Lemlan has to deal with the consequences of choosing him as a companion and learn to fight with cunning and strength. And in front of them, a horde of rats waiting for the two of them to finish talking. Hans charges at the army of disease carriers. The critters realize they can fight now and rush in. Then the protagonist closes in on the rat, leading the pack. The creature throws some kung fu at him. At least this one has normal teeth. Hans cuts rat number 1 in half, making that leptospirosis of their spray out. Then he does the same to the next rat. But while he takes down the third, one of the rats slips past him and heads for Lemlan. He sees the thing go by, but decides not to do anything. Surely the elf can handle at least one on her own. Well, Lemlan's first reaction is to panic. She flails around so much that the rat actually pauses for a second to figure out what's going on. The protagonist looks at the situation and thinks she's acting like a kid, freaking out like that over a single little rat. In the first battle the elf took part in, she did surprisingly well, but starting to fight up close is a whole different story. The enemy's blade is bigger, and its breathing feels way too close, but the scariest part is the feeling of skin getting cut and the blade piercing through. That feeling keeps building up until it turns into full in panic. He still remembers the terror of facing Wolfriken, even with Kata's skill to rely on. Even though Lemlan has the crafty ability of the White Flowers tribe, she still lacks a lot of combat experience. Using a dagger can be kind of discouraging, but like they say, better than giving fish is teaching how to fish. The elf needs to become the kind of warrior who can fight on her own. So the protagonist yells at the girl that if she doesn't want to end up dead like a loaf of bread, she'd better grab the long stick inside the backpack. Luckily, the rats are very polite, and the girl has time to rummage through the backpack. She asks if the stick is the one she's holding, and Hans confirms. Then he tells her to hold the item tight and smack it hard against the wall, and Lemlan follows the master's instructions. And the tip of the big stick lights up in flames. Then the elf asks the protagonist what that is. He explains it's a Rakma torch and warns that it costs a fortune, so she should never drop it somewhere little pests like the plague rat get scared just from seeing the torchlight. Then the guy asks what she's waiting for to get rid of that mangy critter. At first, the little elf is confused. Normally, she doesn't have to fight monsters, but eventually she gets it that pickle right there really is hers. So she looks at the big rat and the thing's just standing there, kinda stunned by the magic fire. Lemlan talks herself into it, thinking that if she wants to stay by her master's side, she can't keep being scared forever. Then the elf closes her eyes and tries to remember how Hans usually deals with situations like this. Half a second later, she opens her eyes like she knows what to do now. Next, the girl does her best to copy the moves she's seen countless times while following the protagonist, spins the dagger, and rushes in with the support weapon out front. Then she uses a single move to close the distance she got with the torch, striking the little rat in the back of the neck. The elf looks so natural fighting the monster that it doesn't even seem like minutes earlier she was shaking with fear a little ways off. Hans watches his apprentice hunt alone for the first time. Then Lemlan looks at him, a bit out of breath, probably from the adrenaline, and our hero tells her she passed after a while. The duo manages to wipe out all the rats blocking the passage. Our little elf catches her breath while convincing herself she really did take out 23 of those creatures, but Hans is more worried about looking at the wall than he runs his hand over the brick and says that place was exactly how he remembered it. All mysterious out of nowhere, the protagonist pauses, still studying the stone in front of him, then he grabs his little pouch and says that since the place was exactly like in the game too. Then he pulls 2 damn stones out of the bag and says you can break that wall and cut straight to the boss of that area. The guy sets the 2 little stones right next to each other on the ground. And then he uses a 3rd stone to make a spark and tosses it at the other 2. As the little stone flies, our hero gets the little elf's attention. Then he puts his hand on her head and she gets all happy thinking she's about to get praised. But Hans just tells the girl to lower her head. Lemlan looks at the wall in the direction where she saw the master throw that thing. And that's when the elf realizes what's about to happen. Her face goes full panic. Then boom, right, the thing explodes. As the smoke clears, you can see a passage made by the blast. Hans puts the backpack on the ground to get to work. And Lemlan's soul smiles as it leaves her body. Like it's already on its way to paradise. Then the guy tells the girl to stop being dramatic and follow him. Her soul realizes it has to go back to her body and gets bummed out. As they move forward, Lemlan asks the master if where they're going also has rats. The protagonist says yes and casually mentions that actually, that's where the rats are born. He turns around to look at the little elf and asks if she's doing okay. The girl thinks he's talking about her job as his pack mule and says yes, because his backpack seems pretty tough. But that's not what Hans meant. He meant the horrible smell of the place. So yeah, she's not happy about the stink, but it's nothing she can't handle. The protagonist thinks about how the elf has a stronger stomach than he expected. Then looks ahead. Right there is the plague's home. The jacked-up rat called Kirat. Hans looks at the beast sleeping there and thinks about how he'd love to hit the creature from far away and wipe it out right then and there, but if he did that, every single rat in that place would come running straight to him, and if he so much as touches any of them in the state he's in, it's gonna go bad. So the guy asks the elf for the backpack and pulls out a bundle of explosive arrows. With tips made from firestones instead of iron. That's a classic combo from the hero Parvel's Cordovan. Lemlan takes one of the arrows and notices the tip is way heavier than a normal one. So she asks the master if that thing's gonna fly straight. Hans just says it's not a problem while he readies the bow, already aiming at the target. He asks if the girl seriously thinks he couldn't hit it. Then tells her to pay attention because this right here was the bare minimum. But of course for him it ends up being easy because of Parvel's skill. So he decides the first shot will be a little to the right for him. Accuracy isn't a necessity. You just need to be in the right place. The arrow flies all crooked because of the weight, but the power still pushes it forward. Then it lands right on the edge of one of the rat holes. Time for those miserable pests to run for their lives. The thing blows up and rats go flying everywhere. Obviously, the little elf is impressed. Not knowing he was cheating, she was thinking the guy was just that good. Hans asks for the next arrow and it's already in his hand. He watches the rat's movement, does a quick calculation, and comes to the conclusion the next hole must be about 30 degrees to the right this time. The unluckiest little rat of them all was coming out of the hole for a stroll, just in time to see the bomb dropping onto his forehead again. Everything explodes, and the other little rat, who was farther back, is horrified watching his friends end. Then the protagonist asks for another arrow and the elf hands it over fast. Now our girl's already pretty well trained. In the game where the rat hole spawned was random, but they ran in patterns whenever the next hole was blocked. Now, it was about blocking the next hole before the rats fleeing the last attack reached it. They join the ones from the previous attack and keep going in the same direction, so he blows up the creature's third passage. Then he blows up the fourth too before they can reach it. The fifth, which is the farthest to the left with that whole bunch of creatures on the move, he decides to speed it up a bit, and fires the arrows one after another into the 4 remaining holes. Now he only had to shoot one more time since the little bastards always ran in one specific direction. He could gather all of them at the exit of a single hole. And sure enough, there was the army of 3D rats. And it lands right on the tip of Junior's nose. The little rat who worked distributing fresh crumbs. Then boom again, right, 10 arrows, and the protagonist cleared out 99. 99 of the monster population in the cave. Since the last explosion was kinda close to where the duo was, the ground around them actually shakes. And that ends up shaking the corner where the gym rat was sleeping. This guy must be deaf. Right, 10 explosions didn't wake him from his beauty sleep. It took everything shaking for him to wake up and catch that barbecue smell. Like we already know, our guy stinks. So it didn't take long for Ratana's to find him. The stinky one even asks if the bastard finally woke up. The dude breaks into his cave, blows up his whole family, wakes him up, and in the end still talks trash at him. Obviously the beast got pissed, and let out a roar while striking a pose that showed he never skips a training day. The gym rat's scream is so loud it makes the cave walls shake. Then he realizes absolutely nothing happened, and gets confused, looking around. And our hero just stands there waiting for the beast to understand his situation. From a good distance, Hans watches the result of his efforts. Satisfied, he looks at the Chad rat and asks what he's gonna do now without his buddies. Besides screaming, of course. Then the beast shows that besides screaming, he also knows how to growl. That dungeon is different from the others the protagonist has been to so far, because it's a secret mission, with that rat right there who clearly needs therapy. And it's definitely not the kind of mission you can finish right after the Alban fortress while the big love-struck rat charges at the guy. All he can think about is how there's no way he could beat that thing in his current state. But he won't have to face the rat. Because of the artifact he had to bend over backwards to get. Inside the ruby is trapped the summonable spirit of Sultan Radak, but of course, being able to summon him and making him obey are two completely different things. Hans will have to tame him himself. The man calls for the Sultan, and the redstone starts letting out smoke. Then the protagonist holds the sketchy jewel, and watches all the power wrapping around the area around him. At that moment, bright flames appear in the middle of all the smoke. The firehead asks who had the nerve to disturb his nap, and the gym rat lets loose his green moss disease. Radak wants to know who this ugly creature is, and the leptospirosis is already coming right at his face. The metal tough guy puts a hand on his already messed up face, and asks what the hell this disgusting green gunk is. Hans figures maybe the invincibility status disappeared after the badass got trapped in the amulet. The Sultan tries to understand what's going on, but a hand is already coming in at full speed. That's when the sewer king lands a solid punch right in his face. And maybe it'd be better to get some tests at the public clinic after that Radak goes crashing into the rocks, making a noise like 1,000 grandma pots and pans. The vengeful one gets all offended at the audacity of these miserable losers. He grips his sword and summons the power of Albaros, which starts giving off red smoke. The protagonist tries to hype up his Pokemon, telling him to show his strength. At that moment, the Sultan senses the boy's presence and just says, "You." Hans crosses his arms and says it's really ugly to call your master you. Radak asks how this human became his master, and even thinks the fact he's just sitting there is ridiculous. Our guy shows the amulet and explains he's his master because the object is his now. The Iron Crack guy thinks that's hilarious since Head never agreed to take part in a duel like this. But the big rat is already coming again. He tries to hit the man, who does his best to defend himself while cursing out this disgusting creature. Hans already figured it wouldn't be easy to control the guy and realizes hell need to push him to the limit, so he says he needs to prove himself to be his servant. The Sultan says he doesn't want to be his servant at all, and dares him to come down there and face the big beast too. Our boy says he's not getting the situation and that if he keeps that attitude it'll be pointless, so he hangs the amulet on a rock. The jewel in the object holds Radak's life, and that's why it's like a life preserver. Almost like it's a shackle. The man panics and begs for just one more minute. Hans explains he only has two options. Either he finishes off the big rat and becomes his servant, or he can rot forever with the sewer beasts. The Sultan keeps fighting, but says he's not gonna buy into the nonsense he's talking. Radak and the gym rat stare each other down. The protagonist says the other guy made a contract with the devil himself, so he figures he must be a pretty chill human. If the iron guy keeps up this rebellion there won't be any other choice, and the boy calls Lemlan so they can leave. They know the negotiation starts when everyone understands what position they're in, and the Sultan gets a little desperate, asking them not to just leave like that. Hans looks back like he couldn't care less. Radak says hell take care of the big rat first, and after that they can talk more calmly. The protagonist just thinks all of this is such a pain, And then he decides he can use a punishment here. Holding a bluish stone, he throws that stone with a lot of force. The object smacks into the ground and shatters into pieces, releasing green smoke. That smoke reaches the sewer beast. With that, the rat practically doubles in size, and Radak asks what the hell the kid just did. The stone the boy just threw can cause agitation and give more strength to plague-related monsters. Like Karet, it's a stone with an enhancement effect. The bomb-loaded monster raises its giant arms. He slams his veiny hands into the rock. The ground cracks all around the firehead. So the guy stares down the jacked-up rat, and he probably even wants a tip on what supplements to take for training. His sword is on fire, man, while he calls the opponent a pest. He makes a quick move with his weapon. The blade hits the other little rats that didn't take steroids. The guy calls the big beast to a fight. And of course the jacked one isn't gonna refuse, right? Sultan Radak is a knight who values honor above anything else in the Vantablack ring. In this world, most knights are a bunch of bullies who don't care about honor at all. The leptospirosis guy opens his buck-toothed mouth. Radak tries to dodge his enemy coming in fast. At that moment, the place gets filled with smoke and dust. Good thing nobody there has asthma. The gym rat stares at his opponent with veins popping from so many steroids. Hans thinks it's exactly because of the Sultan's personality that he decided to destroy his honor. Our guy rests his hand on his helmet. The protagonist says the iron-built beast looks pretty tired. He climbs down from where he was and heads toward his newest servant. Then he lands on the stone floor and asks if the guy needs a little help since he's having such a hard time, but Radak just tells him to cut it out with the jokes and swears he can handle it with no problem. Hans tells him to do his best then, and the Sultan gets pissed as a huge punch comes flying his way. The man turns to the big monster and yells that he's in the middle of a conversation like, "Dude, read the room." But the jacked one doesn't even care and already raises his arm. And then the guy takes the chance to use his sword. The ugly creature's arm went bye-bye thanks to that hit. Suddenly something shoots off the ground so fast it leaves only a little puff of smoke behind. Radak bursts forward at high speed with his sword in hand. Running straight at the enemy, he grips his weapon and he's surrounded by flames, and then he makes a precise slash, spraying leptospirosis everywhere. The gym rat makes a sound of desperation and falls to the ground, making a huge crash. At that moment, the Sultan gets ready to run again. Hans thinks about how the knight is handling the fight well, even without being that high level. But it's no wonder Karet is known as a secret boss. Radak looks at his opponent lying on the ground. The rat's eyes are still glowing, and the guy realizes he can recover from that kind of damage. In a kind of gross way, the creature's arm starts sticking back onto the shoulder like it's made of slime. The Sultan decides he's gonna keep wrecking the big rat until it's actually dead for real. And then he starts walking toward the monster. Hans thinks this is gonna be pointless. Karet's strategy is simple, but even so, it's impossible to beat him if you don't know what his trick is. That trick involves a bunch of heals done by his little minion rats, and you've got to find a way to reduce his healing and regeneration to win the battle. But he's got a really annoying trait to deal with. That trait is nasty resistance, which you can see when the knight's sword cuts through him with force. When the big rat's health drops below 1, his HP doesn't go down for 3 seconds. So as long as the little rats exist, his HP is basically infinite. The jacked one tries to land a powerful hit on his enemy. Radak goes flying and slams his back into the stone wall. He leans on his weapon to get up, and gets mad thinking a little monster can cause this much damage. Our guy knows nasty resistance can be used twice if the big beast fully heals, so he needs to finish him off. Before that, the protagonist's sword flashes past the Sultan, and then it ends up hitting the bodybuilder's slimy arm. A huge explosion lights up the place, and Karet lets out a scream at that totally not vegan move. Radak asks what the guy is planning to do, and he tells his servant to stay put and just watch. Hans knows the nasty resistance skill already triggered, and more than 3 seconds have passed. So the big rat can't trigger it again until he fully heals. Karet gets ready to fight his other enemy, and he's about to use his arm that still works. The protagonist lets out a sigh, and energy starts wrapping around his body. The strength of the two opponents clashes, and creates an impressive shockwave in the air. Looks like the big beast is really pissed. Hans starts getting dragged by the bodybuilder's force with leptospirosis. He realizes the big beefy guy is trying to buy a little time to recover. Since he's in pretty bad shape, the guy manages to move his weapon in a circle. His whole body shines as he asks if Karet has any idea how much time he's already wasted with this bullshit. Hans jumps so fast he practically vanishes out of nowhere, and he closes in on the big rat, ready to attack. Coming from above, he decides it's about time to put an end to this show. Then he lands a precise strike, leaving a glowing trail of power in the air. The big monster doesn't even get a chance. Poor thing, its buck-toothed mouth lets out one more cry for animal rights, while half its body just turns into a memory. Hans looks at the muscle head lying in front of him. He crouches down to pick up the leptospirosis stone. Radak looks confused and asks how the hell he did that. The protagonist says he had high expectations for his servant, but he turned out useless, and the guy is shocked to hear that. Then the guy says he just wasted his time, and tells the Sultan to go back into his amulet. The man asks him to wait, but his body is already starting to fall apart. Hans thinks Radak must have a different impression of him now. He tells Lemlan to grab the bag and climb down there, and the little elf girl says she will. Our guy thinks now they should solve the village's problem, and tells the girl to stop wasting time because they're in a hurry. All of a sudden the kid just falls off the cliff. Hans only realizes something's happening behind him, but he doesn't really get what it is. The poor thing is sprawled on the ground, all twisted up. The protagonist wonders what this crazy girl is doing, and why she couldn't toss the bag before running over there. He warns they've got a lot to do, and tells the girl to stick close to him. The guy and the elf walk through the dark cave. Metal stakes are stuck into the stone floor. Hans says he finally found what he was looking for. Really harsh judgments were carried out in the world of Vantablack. Ring Malice tried to destroy the places where humans lived. Several rats are piled on top of each other. The biggest problem with the disease hitting the village is finding decent water. Hans spins the iron staff in his hands with a quick motion, and then he pierces the ground with it. Carrette started living in the water channels, which caused contamination. Because of that, the villagers got sick from drinking the polluted water. Lemlan asks if what the protagonist has in his hand is the transformation stone, and wants to know what his plan is. So he explains he's going to do a purification. Hans says the girl already knows the red magic stone, and says the white one is a sacred stone. If they free the water blocked by bodies with a fire stone, maybe the flow will come back. And the plan is to purify that water with the sacred stone. The little elf girl is surprised, since she thought Hans had no intention of helping the villagers, but remembering her interaction with that commoner, the girl realizes she was wrong about him, and she's a little happy to notice her master already meant to solve the village's problem. She gets all excited, and asks if she can help with anything, but the guy just says no. Lemlan remembers who she's dealing with. Poor thing, the girl watches her master working, and she just stands there doing nothing. The little elf girl's dumbfounded face is starting to get out of hand. That's when Hans finally notices. He lets out a tired sigh and asks if the girl wants to help now. Our elf is all happy and says yes. The protagonist explains there are some plague rats on the path they came from, and asks her to deal with them, since he needs to tie up the metal stakes. Lemlan gets a little worried, and asks if he means those rats. The girl starts thinking of some excuse to back out, but she remembers Flop saying she can't hesitate or she'll end up losing something, and that she needs to act on her instincts. Our little elf decides she can't be abandoned by her master now. Hans tells the girl to prove her worth, but then he realizes she's already gone, and he's kind of surprised by that. The red mark that used to be stamped on Lemlan's skin isn't there anymore. Following your master is just a matter of choice, but if things keep going like this, the girl believes she'll end up being useless. The elf knows the protagonist never asks for anything she can't do, so she needs to hold strong even if she's scared. Our girl stares down the rats in the dark hallway and thinks she doesn't want to be abandoned anymore. To stay by her master's side, she needs to become a useful tool. The girl makes a quick leap and then she attacks one rat and quickly finishes off another, but she feels like she needs to do more. Lemlan moves fast and takes down more rats, but she still wants to be more useful. Our little elf grips her weapon and looks determined, thinking she needs to get stronger. The sun shines above the deep well. Hans ties ropes to the iron bars, and several rats are lying dead around him. This is the first time he's let Lemlan fight on her own, but this time, the protagonist wanted to see how she'd handle being alone in a dangerous situation. The elf backs away from a rat that tries to lunge at her. Even though she's a bit clumsy, the girl is trying to follow the instructions she was given, and Hans thinks that's enough for now. He shouts Lemlan's name, and she turns to see what her master wants. The protagonist reminds her that if she only thinks about defending, she'll miss her chance to attack, and the girl gets it right away. Our little elf gets ready to face more rats that come running in. One of them jumps straight at her. The girl makes a quick move with her knife, then she hits the thing without mercy, and she's already on to the next one. Look how fierce she is. Lemlan breathes hard once again, but another rat comes up behind her back. The girl turns around, not understanding what's happening. Something hits the animal that was about to attack right before disaster strikes, and it's Hans' foot, who protects her with one hell of a kick. The protagonist asks why the little elf is fighting with such a heavy bag on her back. So the girl explains that he's the one who told her to keep the backpack safe. Now the white stone is tied right next to the red stone. Lemlan gets tied up too and asks why, and Hans answers that this is her lifeline rope. The guy says the rats will be here soon and asks the little elf to deal with them until they get up there. She gets worried and asks if she has to do it alone. The protagonist throws the rope up and the two of them wait. At that moment, the metal tip catches on the edge of the well. Hans asks if the kid thought she'd be abandoned, and she says no. Lemlan thinks her master is different from the people she knew before, and now she seems ready to follow his orders. The elf gets ready to face the rats coming closer. Some time passes, and the girl is already standing on a pile of nasty rats. But it looks like these things never end. Suddenly sharp objects are thrown into the air, and several ugly animals get hit dead on. Our little elf is surprised when she sees that. Then she smiles when she realizes she got a little help from her master. Hans grips the rope with all the strength he's built up this whole time, and strains even harder as he pulls the rope upward. He makes a move that makes the object rise up through the well. Lemlan is lifted by the safety rope tied around her waist. With that, her knife falls to the ground, and the girl gets yanked up like she's as light as a rag doll. The poor kid goes flying through the air, all awkward, and finally, she lands on the protagonist's shoulder, who is ready to catch his little one. Hans praises the girl for the good work. He thinks about Kaire's magic stone, and about Sultan Radak's submission. Now he wants to see how useful the little elf will be from here on out. And since she's from the White Flower tribe, the downsides might be bigger than the upsides. But the guy doesn't need to worry about that right now. He strikes the red stone against the edge of the well, and it even throws sparks. Looks like all the necessary prep is already done. And now it's time to deal with something else. Hans tosses the red stone into the well, and it hits the ground down below. The sky looks really beautiful above the village. Someone uses a magic circle over a man. That circle starts to glow with more power. But then the pattern falls apart, like it's cracking. The cleric realizes that not even her holy magic is doing anything. Then the guy asks if that's what she meant when she said she understood the situation. The girl just calls for her captain, annoyed. Albrecht asks if they really can't do anything else at that moment. The ground around him starts to shake, and a huge jet of water can be seen in the distance, which makes the blonde guy ask what the hell that is. People realize the jet really is water, and clean water at that. A woman says the gods forgave them because of their patience, and blessed their dry land with clean water. The cleric warns her captain that there's something in the sky, and the man orders everyone to form a line along with the water. Plague rats appear in the air. Albrecht yells at his group to protect all the villagers and wipe out every monster falling from the sky. Hans is in a field of flowers with Lemlan, and says everything went just like expected. He's going to let the knights deal with the rats that fall into the village. The protagonist tells the little elf they need to move fast. Our guy wipes his forehead and lets out a tired sigh. Then he says they should be getting there already. Albrecht yells that he finally found our boy, and asks what he's doing there. But Hans remembers had already said he was going to handle his errands on his own. He thinks he needs to hold back and keep up appearances for the sake of his social connections. Meanwhile, the child runs after a butterfly. The captain asks if the protagonist was responsible for what happened to the well water. Our guy answers that if killing the monster makes him responsible, then yeah, it was him. Albrecht wonders if his knights would have been able to defeat a monster that big, since the explosion was huge. And he realizes he can't even imagine the level of talent our kid has. The man says he gets his side, and says he's going to need his help dealing with the consequences of what happened. But Hans says he wants to finish picking his little flowers first. If that's okay. The captain looks kind of confused hearing that, so the protagonist explains the rats were the only ones that escaped to the village, and the knights will be able to handle it without any trouble by the time they get there. All this mess should already be over. The guy explains the first step is treating the people with green moss disease, and Albrecht asks if he knows how to do that. Hans says he's already read a book about this disease, and the solution might not be perfect, but it's worth trying. Lemlan panics when she gets caught red-handed doing nothing. The captain thinks had already given up because not even holy magic worked, but says they need to check the effect if this little flower really is the cure for the green moss disease. Hell send his knights to help. The protagonist tells them to check right away then, and thinks nobody would turn down a little help. Albrecht, Hans, and Lemlan arrive at the village, where most of the rats have already been taken out. Our guy asks where they're going, and the blonde says they need to explain the situation to the village chief. A gray-haired man is coughing in his bed when he gets the news that he has visitors. He asks his visitors to come in. The old man starts thanking them for visiting the village. But he gets confused when he finds out who's there in his room. The chief recognizes Lemlan as the silver-haired Salvation. He explains that his village has a prophecy. This prophecy talks about the day the silver-haired Salvation arrives, and that on that day, all their suffering will come to an end. Hans thinks about this silver-haired Salvation, and wonders if it could be Lemlan. But the girl is just confused. It's true the elf is from the White Flower tribe, but if she were some kind of Salvation, she'd be way more useful than she is right now. The protagonist saved the girl from the slave market, and wonders what kind of abilities the little elf might have. But the old man already starts thanking his supposed savior. Lemlan says she didn't do anything special, but the guy says he already felt safe the moment he saw her. Our little elf doesn't really know what to say, and asks her master for help. Hans cuts in on the commotion to ask if there's some kind of container around. He starts rummaging through his bag, and pulls out his little flower, saying he's going to make a cure for green moss disease. So he figures this medicine comes from the Salvation herself. The ambrosia flower uses contaminated water as nutrients to bloom. It's possible to mix this flower with the water that was purified with the sacred stone, and something happens when those two ingredients are crushed together. By doing that, Lemlan believes she can create the cure for green moss disease. With that, the little elf will be able to help the villagers. Hans is sitting on a bench outside. He thinks the trigger should have gone off already. Our elf notices her master is there, and she says that with the knight's help, the village finally got rid of the green moss disease. Then she thanks the guy for helping, but the protagonist says he doesn't need any thanks. Lemlan gets confused again, poor thing. At that moment, Albrecht notices the presence of the two-looking people and comments that, so that's where Lord Evan was. He says there was a small misunderstanding, and he says the Lord is an amazing person who knows how to help the weak. Hans just says he didn't do it in exchange for praise, but the captain sees that attitude as proof of humility, and believes it was a blessing to have met Evan. Even so, the protagonist thinks that's not what he wanted to hear. He wonders why he didn't get any reward since he worked so hard to help. Then it hits him, and he realizes it makes no sense to build up that whole expectation. Suddenly, the village chief shows up and goes after his savior, saying he's got a little gift for her. The man shows a dagger that's been passed down for generations in the village, and that the prophecy says they must hand this weapon over to the Salvation with silver hair. And the old man is sure of one thing. He knows that this so-called silver-haired Salvation is right there in front of him. Lemlan thinks she's not that amazing of a person at that moment. Hans steps closer to take a look at the dagger and seems to recognize it. This is the sort of silent truth, the final reward for completing the Save the Village quest in the main story. The perks on this weapon aren't that great, considering all the effort, but it'll work just fine for the elf for now. The protagonist tells the girl to take the sword, and she wants to know if she really can. Her hand grips the weapon's thin handle, and the girl is impressed by the shine of the metal. Hans decides this will be his reward after all, and thinks it's weird to treat Lemlan so well since her race gets looked down on by others. Even so, it was the protagonist who worked so hard on this mission. The girl asks why her master is making that face, but he just says he has to go to Sultan sometime later. Big wheels roll over the dirt road. Knights escort a carriage along the way. They pass through a ravine that looks more dangerous than a lot of Brazilian highways. Men lift rocks and stack them into a huge pile. Hans lifts a massive rock like it's nothing. Looks like today's workout is done. The protagonist is inside the carriage next to Lemlan, who looks out the window like a nosy neighbor. At that moment, one of the knights says he can already see Sultan. The big city shines with huge, luxurious buildings. Sultan is the capital of the Pinstanch Empire now. Some people walk along a red carpet inside a palace. Two men in armor walk side by side. Albrecht tells Evan that Your Majesty is a bit on edge because a great demon appeared near the Cheslow border. Hans already expected it would be something related to that problem, and the pace of Vantablack Ring isn't that different from the game. The captain asks if the protagonist is going to keep his helmet on inside. The palace might even bring bad luck, like opening an umbrella indoors. Our guy explains that this armor belongs to the wandering knight your majesty is looking for, the same one who saved the Alban fortress. Hans and Lemlan are right in front of the king. The man with the crown stares at the two of them with his blue eyes. Our guy bows and says it's an honor to meet the great king of Pinstanch. The elf realizes she needs to do the same too, right? She looks at the ruler on his throne. The king closes his eyes for a moment. Then he asks whether the wandering knight Evan knew that Raz means ancestor and Grad means fortress, and that this refers to what they know as Razgrad. Hans is left speechless for a few seconds. A monster that makes it rain 1,000 weapons. A demon of the ancestral fortress. That demon is Razgrad, and according to the story a hero accepted the mission to defeat that creature. The protagonist wonders if the king is bringing this up because the other hero also got taken out, and he finds this game kind of funny. He knows that going after Razgrad in his current state would be the same as killing himself. So the guy says that demon isn't the kind of thing a simple mercenary like him can take on. The ruler finds his attitude suspicious, since he hadn't said anything about that until now. Hans says his instincts told him the mission to take down this demon would be handed to him. Then the big shot king says that's not exactly what he wanted to ask, but yeah, it's related. The king warns that he called him because he needs his help, but he doesn't plan on making him face the demon alone. He says he already has a hero in charge of that task, and that he needs the protagonist to help him outside. The palace is lit up by the sun. A beam of light comes out through one of the windows, and the great ruler is right beneath it. A man starts walking over and catches his majesty's attention. The king looks at him kind of suspiciously. Albrecht says Evan claims he's just a simple mercenary, but what he's seen says otherwise. The powerful one says he gets what the captain is trying to say. He asks if it's true that this mercenary's identity wasn't checked. The other one says yes, and that they just assumed the mysterious guy came from humble origins. But the king noticed this guy knows etiquette and even the rules of the court. He says he's had a lot of people around him in his life because of his status, and some of those people were mercenaries. Those mercenaries fell into two categories: the ones who shook with fear, and the ones who were rude. The ruler agrees with the knight, and he knows that this Evan guy's skills were impressive. Albrecht says that's true even though he's a bit embarrassed, and his majesty says he doesn't need to worry about that. He says he values the captain for being an honest person. The king felt this mercenary would be different from the others, and that's why he wanted to build a connection. So the knight asks what'll happen if Evan doesn't live up to his expectations. The ruler thinks for a while, and decides that really would be a shame. Now in another room in the palace, Hans and Lemlan look around at their surroundings. A maid says if they need anything, they can just say the word. Plates of food are laid out on a table, and our little elf girl is practically drooling. The protagonist tells the knot to stuff herself, then he flops onto a couch, letting out a tired sigh. The guy can already picture the king planning to send the hero to fight the demon to calm the people down. Razgrad lives really close to Cheslow, which would take more damage than Pinstink, and would have to send its own military forces to deal with the threat. Meanwhile, Pinstanch is going to use the lame excuse that it sent a hero to save the nation, and that way it won't have to spend its resources. Hans thinks the route where he took out the king gave him an adrenaline rush he'll never forget. But this time, the reward makes it more worth it not to follow that specific route. Lemlan stuffs her face and thinks she heard wrong. Her master would never take out the king. No way. All of a sudden, a mysterious person comes closer. The kid with her mouth all smeared with sweets is instantly on alert. She calls for her master, who wants to understand what's going on. The girl trembles as she explains that someone really powerful is coming their way. Hans knows the White Flower tribe is sensitive to presences, but it's weird that she felt it even with a wall in the way. The protagonist figures it must be a powerful NPC from Pinstanch, but they should all be at the border, not in the capital. That means it can only be a hero. Our guy takes a step forward and stares at the door, imagining what's coming. A hand grabs the doorknob, then a man walks through the bedroom door. Hans recognizes the character standing in front of him. It's a guy named Farox Hesslein. A big chandelier lights up the luxurious room. The two men stand there, staring each other down. Then the white-haired one asks if the other is Mr. Evan out of the Heroes of Vantablack Ring. This man is the protagonist of one of the main storylines, and he's known as the weapons master Farox Hesslein. The guy introduces himself and says he's under His Majesty's orders. Hans says he's heard of the hero. He laughs and asks not to be called a hero. Then he explains he's just someone who got lucky and knew how to take advantage of an opportunity. This character's traits haven't changed much, which means his story should be the same too. The protagonist apologizes for taking so long to introduce himself, then says he's a Evan, and that his servant is named Lemlan. With that, the girl bows and greets the man. Farox Hessline introduces himself and says it's a pleasure to meet them. Some time passes, and the sun shines bright in the sky. Hans looks at some wooden swords and thinks this hero is the classic kind of character who goes through a growth arc, and he's famous for leveling up really slowly. There's no way he could grow enough to face a demon like that at this point in the story, no matter what happens, so the protagonist decides he needs to test his skills. He calls out Sir Farox's name, and the hero says he can just call him Farox. Our guy asks him to teach him a few things he knows, so the weapons master grips his wooden sword and says he can't wait. The two men stare each other down before the fight, and suddenly, they start moving. Hans tries to rush in with his sword, but the other guy steps back. The protagonist has a determined look. He tries to land another strike. Farox realizes his opponent is really fast, and he's already coming in with another attack. Their swords meet in the middle of the fight, and both of them make quick moves at the same time. The white-haired hero swings his weapon, but Hans manages to dodge in time. Our guy wonders if that's all Farox's headline has to show, and then he activates his inherited skill. Things happen really fast at that moment. The scarred guy opens his eyes in a different way, and he sees his opponent frozen right in front of him. He stares at the sword that's stuck in place. With that, he manages to move out of its path, and the freeze breaks. The two watch each other one more time. One of the swords flies up into the air and then drops to the ground. The protagonist looks tired, and his breathing is heavy. Farox asks to stop there, and Hans admits defeat. Then the white-haired guy smiles and says not to hold back next time. Our guy thinks the hero's combat skills are higher than he expected, which means he was wrong about his growth, but that shouldn't be possible. A few meters away, Lemlan watches everything. Suddenly, a figure shows up, clapping. This man is right behind the elf. He notes that one of them is skilled enough for Lartanians to make a personal recommendation. The two who just fought recognize the guy named Joseph. Farox explains that his opponent is going to help them on their journey with supplies and advice. The gray-skinned man introduces himself as Joseph, and Hans thinks now the weapons master's growth makes sense. Our guy smiles and says his name is Evan, then says he can't wait to work with him. A hand reaches towards something shiny. A long time ago there was a girl with healing power. Her ability was powerful and mysterious, and it drew a lot of people's attention. That power drained her own life force, but the girl kept using it to help other people. Because of that, she ended up spending more life force than she should have. A boy rests his head on the bed of the woman named Evelyn, and she realizes it's her older brother. The young woman asks if he went up into the mountains to look for herbs again. Then she uses her power to heal a small cut on the boy's face, and asks him not to get involved in dangerous stuff like that again. She holds his hand and swears she's fine, but her brother decides he needs to cure Evelyn's condition. Now it's night, and the moon shines over the forest. A carriage passes through the foggy area. Someone says they heard about something during their travels. Farox goes on, saying he heard the sacred relic known as the Fountain of Vitality could save his sister. But then he found out that relic is a natural treasure of Pinstanch. The white-haired man became a hero with the one goal of saving his sick sister. Hans thinks most people would end up in a ditch trying to be a hero, but the bastard's got talent. The scarred guy says he became Pinstanch's hero out of nowhere, and learned something after meeting King Lartanians. He remembers when the man explained that to use the Fountain of Vitality, you need to find another relic, the Vessel of the Soul of Vitality, and that vessel is with Rasgrad, that damn demon. So the protagonist asks if that's why they have to defeat that demon, and the hero says yes, but he also says they're out of time. Hans asks if he means his sister, and he says that's right. Farox believes she only has 3 months left to live. Our guy knows it would normally take 6 months to defeat the demon, and thinks it'd be a good idea to stay with his sister right now. But the weapons master says he has to grab onto even the smallest chance. The protagonist realizes this kid is already a lost cause anyway. In Farox's story, his sister ends up kicking the bucket. After that, the hero finds out it was the demon himself who gave her that power. From then on, the guy loses it and decides to wipe out all demons. And he keeps yelling that if his sister hadn't gotten that power, she'd still be alive. Saving Evelyn Hessline the normal way is just impossible. Farox is dreaming about his sister, of course. Hans wonders if he should let the hero do this, knowing that what he wants most in the world is to chill out and enjoy the moment. What our guy wants most is a life where he gets carried by a hero. Reaching that dream through Farox Hessline is a tempting idea. His skills beat expectations, his motivation is pure, and even his personality is perfect. The protagonist calls over the white-haired kid and asks if he'd be up for taking a shortcut to reach Razgrat faster. Obviously the boy says yes, but then Hans asks if he'd still do it knowing it's dangerous. He says he doesn't care, since he's already willing to face a powerful demon anyway. Our guy asks if the other one would really do anything to wipe that big monster off the map. Farox gets serious and says yes, as long as it doesn't cause any harm to the kingdom of Pinstanch or its citizens, that's what he won't do. But Hans assures him that's not part of the plan. Then Scarface flashes a huge toothpaste ad smile and says if that's the case, he's in. With the fourth hero's confirmation, the protagonist starts getting ready for his next stunt. It'd be good to get allies like them. So the hero starts pretending he's looking for something in his backpack and asks Lemlan if she's feeling anything around the carriage. The little elf is confused. Right? Because she has no idea Hans is just using her race's aura sense as an excuse for knowing the shortcut. Farox is confused too. What's this lunatic asking out of nowhere? Then the protagonist grips a little hatchet in his hand a bit tighter than necessary, and tells Lemlan to focus her senses. After being pressured, the girl closes her eyes and concentrates. It's hazy, but you can see that nearby there's a hooded person. Lemlan explains that to the northeast of where they are, she can feel something unfamiliar. Then Hans leans out of the carriage and yells for Joseph to stop right there. Leaving the driver confused, the protagonist gives a quick explanation that there's something nearby he needs to check out in person. Joseph is not happy about it. The idea itself is absurd. But our guy just turns back into the carriage and tells Lemlan to come with him while he tosses the magic stone over to her. She catches the stone, but she still doesn't get anything sometimes. Her master's decisions were way too random. Then the three of them just stand there like a lamppost, watching Hans head into the forest through the fog. And even farther back, there's another weirdo in a witch hat watching the people, watching the protagonist. A girl runs desperately through the forest. Looks like Little Red Riding Hood is running for her life until she trips on that classic, slightly bent root of some random tree. And she goes down like a sack of potatoes. At least she managed to protect her face. The girl starts trying to get up, but the fall was nasty, and she realizes she's struggling. When Little Red manages to sit up, she realizes it's already too late to run. The big bad wolves gang caught up to her. And look, with how mad those beasts are, at minimum she must have cursed somebody's mom. They're huge silver wolves with shiny fur, thick and wavy, only eat premium kibble. One of the big doggos howls, probably to let the rest know it found the wretch who cursed Aunt Joanna. So the rest of the pack hangs back, while the alpha big bad wolf goes in to deliver justice with his own snout. But a certain little hatchet is already on its way too. And since our hero has aimbot, it hits right between the beast's eyes, and Little Red even looks back to see what kind of divine intervention that was. What she sees is a caped knight. Commenting on the light mist covering the forest, Hans looks at the wolf, its fur shining like it's reflecting moonlight, and its cold blue eyes. Then he identifies the creature as a fog cutter, and realizes he successfully unlocked the secret mission. If you thought there wouldn't be any more moon panel, you were wrong. The wolves from the gang are there ready to attack. Since the other one from the pack got taken out, Little Red Riding Hood is next to Big Black Hat, and the big bad wolf is right there up front. He looks at the little girl, who even gets startled seeing this guy who looks like the boogeyman. Hans notices she really looks like a pure, harmless little kid. The girl gets spooked by a glow that shows up in the middle of the plants. But it was just Lemlan's stone, and now her hair is full of leaves. Her master warns her she's late, and tells the kid to look after the other kid. The protagonist just tells the elf to deal with anything that manages to get through. Considering the abilities the girl has now, she should be able to handle it. Now the tough guy wants to find out how strong he's managed to get. He's waiting for the pack to do something, because taking action is an alpha thing, right? Before, the guy couldn't even take on a wolfrican, but he remembers his encounters with Delic and Anthro, then with Hamel and Radak. and even the damage he did to Kuret, which only happened because he managed to exploit its weaknesses and use some clever tricks. A boss would be a different story, true, but at least he doesn't even need to waste time looking for weaknesses, since they're sinister as hell anyway. Hans finally stops playing beta and decides to jump into action. Already the guy takes off running. He needs to remember the Miscutter's traits, since after attacking, they pull back and slip into the fog again to hide their presence. His way of dealing with that is pretty simple. Just send them all to the other side before they can get back into the fog. The protagonist's sword causes yet another scene that's a vegan's worst nightmare. Somebody call an animal rescue NGO. For the love of God, Hans turns around, scared of the activists, and runs into more little doggos in need of some serious training. He gets ready to deal with these beasts, then he starts throwing punches at the evil doggo. The first one goes flying, and the guy already gets ready to handle the second. Our dog whisperer makes a precise move with his sword, and teaches the wolf it's ugly to growl at other people. The scene is just terrible. It looks like a Chinese butcher shop. But there's a kid watching people. All of a sudden, a lower IQ little wolf shows up next to Lemlan. Our little elf stares right into the eyes of the husky from beyond the seven realms. Look, the moon again. Folks, who would have thought, right? A paw with sharp claws steps onto the forest floor. Then the biggest wolf of them all shows off its huge fangs. Hans realizes that alpha energy can only be from the boss. The bad guy comes closer, and the protagonist knows it'll go badly if he goes into the fog. So he needs to finish the big bad wolf in a single hit. Our guy charges in with no mercy. But the beast bites his sword like it's a little pet shop toy. Right then, our boy activates the skill he inherited from Gerbier. A yellow energy flows through his body and wraps around his weapon. With that, Hans manages to land a solid hit on the big wolf. An explosion takes over the forest. Looks like the protagonist is committing environmental crimes now too. Looks like you can never have too much moon panel, right? Two guys walk together through the forest. Joseph asks what Evan is doing there alone, and Farox is by his side. They come across a sketchy scene, since now the protagonist decided to mess with children's rights too. There's dogs barking, there's a kid crying, and Hans stacking up cancellations. Whitehair tells our guy he's in a hurry, so there's no time to be dealing with insults on Twitter. And now he sides with the activists by asking what the hell he's doing with a defenseless little girl. The hero demands an explanation for this absurdity, or he's gonna drop a massive exposed. But Hans clearly has issues and doesn't even get why the guy is mad. He explains that's exactly why he's trying to buy a little time. But Farox is outraged at this violation of the child and teen statute. The snow guy even clenches his fist and everything. Our protagonist remembers the other guy swore he'd do anything to get to Razgrad faster. The hero is shocked for a second, but then he goes right back to being mad. He asks what Razgrad has to do with all this abuse, and he's basically about to call the hotline. The guy doesn't even say anything because he knows he's gonna get cancelled anyway. But then Joseph asks his friend to calm down a bit, take a breath, you know. The guy asks Evan to explain what he's doing in a way that won't end up trending on some commentary channel. Finally, Hans reveals that this cute little girl is actually a witch. The two of them are shocked, but they're probably even relieved to know they won't end up on Twitter. They stare at the totally not harmless little kid. The girl starts wondering how the hell the man knew that. One of them says witches are really evil beings. Like they even eat people, what the hell? And he still decided to protect the damn thing instead of dealing with her right away. Farox thinks he must have his reasons for doing that. Joseph figures maybe this witch can get them to Razgrad faster. Hans confirms that's exactly it, since to move faster they need to go to the witch's city. And this little witch is gonna be their ticket into that city. The protagonist asks if this is really right, and calls the evil one Stella. She's shocked that her identity got exposed, so our guy grabs a cloth and says it's time for the kid to stay quiet and go to sleep. The girl cries, but she's not fooling anyone anymore with that poor little me face. Farox isn't really buying it, but he'll follow the plan anyway. He just asks them to explain all this nonsense properly later, since he doesn't want to team up with any criminals, right? All of a sudden Lemlan notices something, and the white-haired guy notices something different too. The hero warns that something is coming their way. Hans doesn't feel anything, but from the others' expressions it looks like something really is coming. A pink-haired witch comes rushing in at full speed, making this forest condition even worse. The woman's going crazy looking for the Stella. She's the youngest of the 5 great sages of the witch's city, which is called Aawind. The pink-haired one is known as Aisha, the dream harmonizer. At that moment, the sage calls out for her little witch, and asks how they dare do this. She wants to know how these disgusting humans have the nerve to touch her precious little girl. Farox tells the others he'll deal with Mama. Alhans notices the hero's instincts are impressive, since he always jumps into action when he feels it's his responsibility. But if that alone were enough to end his suspicion, he wouldn't have been betrayed by the other heroes. And our guy remembers he made a promise. The protagonist promised that if Farox gets destroyed by Aisha, then he'll never trust anything in this world again. Meanwhile, the pink-haired one gets ready to throw a stove at the white-haired guy. Hans warns the hero won't be able to beat her, so he should focus on making her submit. Farox understands exactly what he meant by that, and the witch says she wants to send him to the grave. Aisha creates huge flames over her head. The snow guy tells the others to stay back and stay protected. Then the other three position themselves right in front of little Stella. Hans tells Lemlan to protect the little witch. If that fireball hits someone, it could do some serious damage. The protagonist could even beat Aisha by himself. But if Farox insists on doing most of the work, he's not going to be dumb enough to refuse, right? But the plan to subdue Razgrad is going to be totally off the table if the hero loses to this opponent. Our guy wants to see what the white-haired guy can do. Let's go. The dream harmonizer is dying to put someone in a coffin, and she throws her fireball while calling the guy a worm. Now that's a good pest control tip. Farox starts giving off a bluish energy, and grips his sword while waiting for the flames coming at him. Suddenly he makes a quick jump. Then he moves in toward all that fire. But the hero isn't impressed by this little June festival bonfire, and makes a quick move with his weapon to try to deal with the blaze. Aisha smiles and calls the boy an idiot. Right after that the flames grow, and all you can see is the silhouette of the weapons master about to turn into barbecue. The witch flies through the smoke left from her attack. But then she gets a bit frustrated since she wanted to capture the guy still alive, and thinks she ruined everything by getting too excited. Even so, Farox is still standing strong and says he's impressed, because this is the first time he's seen a cheap trick from a little witch. Our white-haired guy is completely wrapped up in his magical power. Hans knows normal spells won't be enough to break through that level of power. The guy gets ready to strike back, and takes off running straight toward the dream harmonizer. She asks if the dude is trying to unalive himself, since when two powers clash, the weaker one just gets destroyed. Aisha creates elemental magic of fire, water, and air. Then she tells the human to surrender to Astawind's incredible power. With that, he throws the 3 balls of different elements at his enemy. Farox just watches for a few seconds before acting. He runs to one side, dodges to the other, and spins. This kid really is super agile. Hans recognizes that skill, where 1 second for normal people turns into 3 seconds for the weapons master. That's the power of time acceleration. And it honestly looks like cheating. Aisha wonders if this guy is a hero-level human, because she can't understand how he managed to move that fast. Then our white-haired guy comes charging straight at the witch. She staggers back from all that force, and asks what a hero-level human is doing there. Farox closes his eyes to shield himself from the light. The witch's hat even ends up falling in the middle of all this chaos. Annoyed, the white-haired guy realizes he fell for yet another bargain bin witch trick. Aisha wants to know how he's got the nerve to say that after making a little kid cry, but the hero explains it had nothing to do with that whole drama. The girl doesn't want to hear it and keeps insisting on sending the kid to the grave. Her power causes so much destruction that pretty soon there won't even be a forest left to fight in. Right then, a glowing hole opens up in the ground, and a monster made of stone and lava comes out of it. Already holding a sword, Farox recognizes the big guy as a fire spirit. In that case, he decides he doesn't need to hold back anymore. White-haired does another quick little hop, and the rock thing is already opening its huge mouth. Our weapons master goes all in at the giant monster. The stone guy raises his massive sword with no mercy at all. But the hero also gets ready to use his weapon, and he just splits the stone right down the middle like he's cutting a piece of cheese. Aisha is shocked because she thought that would be impossible. But our white-haired guy isn't weak, folks. Farox is showing off in the middle of the broken rocks. The witch can barely believe a simple human was able to do all that. The little devil even gives a tiny grin. And then he takes off at high speed toward the girl, who's already getting a little spell ready to counterattack. She creates a blue mass that looks insanely powerful. Her magic is full of intricate design work, and shines like crazy. Aisha even goes and cranks up the power on that weird thing at that moment. A dome full of geometric shapes surrounds the whole battle area. The girl admits the hero is a monster, but bets he can't get out of this. Farox looks kind of confused inside this glowing beehive. He asks if this is one of those defensive spells that can block anything. Then he gets ready for another gymnast-style leap. The kid runs so fast he even makes a rainbow. Look at that cool visual. His sword slams into the bluish barrier, and sparks fly everywhere. The tip of the weapon presses into the shield with a lot of force, and our white-haired kid doesn't give up. The metal starts forming cracks on the surface of the magic beehive. With that, the dome shatters into 1,000 little pieces, to the poor witch's despair. She's stunned by what just happened. The guy decides to brag and says that to this day he hasn't found anything he couldn't overcome. Look at the nerve. And here we go with another moon panel. Pretty soon everyone's gonna be howling on the other side. The rope holding Stella was finally cut. And the little witch runs over all scared into her sister's arms. Aisha hugs the girl and promises everything's going to be okay now. Han says it's really nice to see a family united like that, but they're kind of in a hurry, right? So the girl asks what the hell this guy wants. The protagonist explains they just need a tour guide for a trip through the witch's city, and warns that if she tries anything funny, it's gonna go bad for her. The witch is still shocked at the audacity of these clueless humans. But she realizes the man in front of her has strength with no limits, and on top of that, he doesn't seem to have any kind of weakness. So she figures this human is even more monstrous than the other one she fought a little while ago. Aisha wonders if she should take them to the city, and thinks that would be the safest option. Hans cuts into her thoughts to demand an answer, and the girl decides to accept the tour guide job. Yeah, it's another moon panel, but this time she's at least more mysterious. The witch follows the carriage on her broom. Looking at her, the protagonist can even understand why brooms are such useful tools. The girl's just sitting there chilling while her cleaning tool does all the work. Aisha glances to the side. Kinda suspicious. Then she decides to go over to Hans. She gets into the carriage and asks why he's willing to so much just to get to the witch's city. Our guy asks if he really has to spell it out now. The girl can't understand why two humans would want to go to her city, especially when they're basically hero level. And she says that if the two of them are a danger to the city, then she needs a chance to get ready too. Hans figures that getting ready must be pretty important, and he decides to say they're just looking for a portal. Aisha's a little shocked when she hears that. Same with the little-haired guy and the femboy. She asks if the dude's going to the witch's city just because of a simple portal. Our guy says yes and adds that he's got no reason to lie. The young girl wonders if they're idiots, and thinks she worried for nothing, but then she remembers humans would never understand what witches do. Aisha wants to know if they really want to go there, and the protagonist says yes. She figures they must have prepared for anything that could happen in the city. The humans say yes and ask the witch to just be their guide. But the girl thinks they're prey walking into hunter's territory. She says they'd better not regret it later, since this was their choice sometime before that. Farox is in the carriage with Joseph and thinks that if the demon gets defeated, his sister's gonna end up kicking the bucket, but if what Evan says about the portals is true, that means Evelyn can be saved. The femboy notices his friend's torn between keeping his dignity or saving his little sister. He argues that this could actually be good, not just because of the demon, but also because of Evelyn's situation. The hero knows the offer's too good not to take, but thinks anything that good has to be hiding some kind of catch. Joseph gets curious about that talk. Farox explains it's super suspicious that Evan knows so much and is still that skilled, and he also knows nothing. Really explains this whole situation. The gossip guy even agrees on that point. This mercenary Evan is the kind of person who'd rather act than talk, and he doesn't care about honor, glory, or any kind of justification. He seems like the type who likes efficiency and practicality, which is the total opposite of Farox's headline. The hero usually prefers everything to be crystal clear, and in the worst case, those differences could just break the team apart. Joseph thinks it could be risky. He went pretty far, trying to get an advantage by sticking with Farox, and doesn't want to walk away empty-handed, but then the snow guy says he's already made his decision. The fake one asks what he decided, and he says he's gonna pretend nothing happened. The opportunist still asks if he's sure, but the guy says yes. Evan might be hiding something from him, but Farox didn't tell the mercenary everything either, and she shows up one more time to light up your screens, folks. The carriage wheels roll really fast through the forest. Aisha asks them to stop the vehicle. The femboy doesn't get why. Then the girl explains that if they keep going, they'll fall into the abyss. Joseph pulls a nasty move by saying that really wouldn't be good. The witch even gets kind of nauseous from this roller coaster. Two of the men are up front by the horses now. The opportunist asks if they're really in the right place, since he can't see anything because of the fog. Aisha says that effect is caused by the magic barrier. She says she's going to bring the down so they can pass with that. She starts reciting a spell with the word spirit of nature. Guardian of the emerald, blow away the fog with the power of the wind, light our path with the calm light of the moon, make sure we can see clearly, so all life in the forest can breathe freely. And bless us with nature's beauty. A bunch of flower petals fly through the air as the spell dissolves in front of them. Farox is kind of hypnotized by the scene. Aisha finally introduces the witch's city, a beautiful, magical place known as Aawind. Look at that. This time the moon's up in the corner of the screen. A huge tower reaches up into the sky, and a white-haired woman is standing in front of a window all decorated with stained glass. The young girl tells the other wise woman she's back home since she finished her task, and explains that some adventurers wanted to see her, so she ended up bringing everyone there. Aisha says they want to see the portal. Hans recognizes the big witch as the city's first sage, the most powerful of them all. She's the great witch of Aawind, Eliana, the seer of eternity, who just asks everyone to relax and pick a place to sit. Now a little purple tea gets poured into a cup. Eliana explains she made a tea that's good for your health, since everyone looks tired. The woman takes a little sip, totally at ease. But Farox gets kind of nervous about drinking tea made by a witch. Joseph doesn't look very confident either. Hans gets that everyone thinks the tea is poisoned. Since it was made by a witch, humans and witches can look pretty similar, but they're way too different to get along. Even so, the protagonist drinks the tea, and even says it tastes good, which surprises the others a bit. The witch notices that this Evan guy doesn't seem very suspicious. Our guy asks what he's supposed to be suspicious of. She knows most humans wouldn't drink tea made by a witch, afraid it might be dangerous. But the guy explains he just trusted what they were told, since Aisha trusted them enough to bring them all the way there, right? Eliana asks if that's true, and the girl says yes, of course, definitely, no doubt about it. So the woman decides to get to the most important topic right away. She asks if these humans really came from that far away just to use a portal. The witch warns that unfortunately the portal isn't available right now. Farox and Joseph are outraged when they hear that. With a sly little giggle, the woman comments that everyone is being so serious. Eliana tries to explain that the portal still exists, there's just no way to use it right now. And it's under a bunch of restrictions. Hans wants to know what kind of restrictions those are. She answers that it has to do with Razgrad. The little hair duo and the femboy are shocked again. Meanwhile, Lemlan and the protagonist just drink their little tea really fast. Everyone stares at each other across the table, and our guy lets out a sigh. Long story short, they're using a ton of mana to protect the city from Razgrad, so there's none left to activate the portal, and it'll take at least 3 days before the portal can be used again. Most of that is all a lie, but this situation is exactly like the game, so everything is going perfectly according to plan. Has any of you started counting how many moon frames we've got here? I know that now. 2 people walk down a hallway in the castle. Aisha says the rooms were set up based on the number of people, but they're more spread out because it's been a long time since they've had visitors. She hopes the humans understand. Hans realizes the witches want them separated and thinks it's super obvious. They didn't even try to hide it. The protagonist thanks her for taking the guy job and says they can handle things on their own now. The witch is about to leave, but our guy calls her name. He says he wants to talk to her about something later. The young woman doesn't get it at all. What does this guy want now? Hans says he wants a little visit to his room, making Lemlan curious about those adult topics. Aisha is just horrified. Like, what is this kid even thinking? That's outrageous, but voices in her head tell her to accept the request, and she believes that voice is her sister's, so the girl says she'll stop by later, yeah, and that they should rest since they've traveled for so long. The witch starts walking through the corridors alone. A mysterious woman is holding a glass orb right behind a corner. Aisha suddenly stops walking and finds the poor thing hiding there, who only says the boss name, hoping she won't get scolded. The girl presses her face up to the crystal ball and asks if her sister was really listening to the whole conversation. Shed already told her to stop being such a gossip. Outside the castle, the night goes on. Someone comments that they were worried about the offering date. Eliana thanks her younger sister and asks if she knows what she has to do now. Aisha says she doesn't need to worry because she knows perfectly well. The big witch says then they won't have any problems, but the girl doesn't look very happy. She asks if they really need to send all of them to Belladonna. Her sister gets a more serious look and answers that yes, of course they do. The younger one isn't happy with the answer, and Eliana asks her not to make that ugly face because she knows the reason behind it. If they don't sacrifice the humans, they'll have to sacrifice Astolwin's own witches to use as an offering. Aisha doesn't seem okay with that and tries to argue, but the oldest one reminds her that the offerings are running out, since all the mana-filled life in the area is reaching its limit. And if they don't make that offering within 3 days, Astolwin will be destroyed. So she asks if the girl is ready to take on that responsibility. She's kind of shaken and says no. The old witch didn't want to have to do this, but her situation is complicated, so she has no choice. The fact that Evan chose her sister as a guide means he at least let his guard down around her. That's why Eliana needs the girl to take action this time. Aisha doesn't really like this talk, but agrees to do whatever it takes. The woman also says she used her instinct sight earlier, just to check something, and she saw that this Evan guy came to their city with a specific goal in mind. He seems to be the leader of the group, so there's no need to check the others, since they must have the same goal. The old witch feels something weird about this guy, but she believes she doesn't need to worry about it. Eliana says this is Aisha's first task of the night, and that she shouldn't be nervous because now she's a wise woman of Astolwind. Even though she's not happy about it, the girl understands what she's asking. She thinks that now she's like her other sisters. The girl is a witch in charge of protecting the city of Astolwind, and she knows she has a duty to carry out. Our video ends here. If you liked it, leave your like. See you next time. Bye bye.